Why do we love Godzilla? I don't think that's a question with a definitive answer. Every person has their own reason for being a fan of this guy. However, I think we can all agree that the one element of these films that encompasses almost everything else is none other than the fight scenes. Hell yeah, now this is what I'm talking about. Godzilla has been duking it out with other kaiju and the like for 70 years now, and he ain't stopping anytime soon. While it's not how the series began, it always seemed to be the natural progression for the character. Not only because giant monsters throwing hands is just a badass concept at face value, but also because they can be used to deliver themes and subtext to the audience, while further developing the monsters themselves. This is why Godzilla movies will never get old. There's always a new story to tell, or a unique spin on a classic story. The point is, I like it when two kaiju smash each other, okay? So I thought it would be fun to rank all the times Godzilla has fought against another opponent. As of the making of this video, there are currently 38 mainline Goji films, alongside 5 different G-Fest short films which I'll be including in this ranking, primarily because it'd be a shame to skip over some of the godlike suitmation, VFX and cinematography on display in these shorts. After going through them all, I counted 76 fights in total, and so I'm going to be ranking all of them from worst to best. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to lay down some basic ground rules. Firstly, like I said, this video will be focusing on the mainline entries and short films, so no Iron Dragon or generic Hanna-Barbera monsters on this list. Godzilla is a massive multimedia franchise spanning pretty much every medium and product you can think of. I legitimately think it would be impossible to count every single fight Godzilla has ever been in, period. Plus, I'd be here all day and this video is long enough. We can all agree it's primarily a film franchise, and it's what I'm most familiar with, having watched them all myself. So for the sake of convenience and consistency, that's what I'll be covering. Secondly, I'm basing all these rankings on the times Godzilla has actually fought another kaiju slash mech slash alien slash big based burbs. I mean, you get the picture. Which means no standoffs with the military and the JSDF. Let's put it this way, humanity is rarely, if ever, on equal standing with our beloved radioactive dinosaur. Usually the humans are trying to delay, distract or trap Godzilla, not outright kill him, because he's way too powerful and we suck. Unless we build a giant robot of our own, which of course I'll be counting. Third of all, what I count as a fight is each time Godzilla takes on another kaiju until he either wins or gets knocked out and has a rematch with that same kaiju later in the film. You know, something along those lines. For example, in Godzilla vs Kong, the two monsters duke it out in the sea and later have a rematch in Hong Kong. That's clearly two different fights, and therefore 2 different entries on this list. This is why Destroy All Monsters is on here once, while Final Wars is on here, no joke, 7 times. Additionally, I'll be ranking each fight on a variety of elements, i.e. visual presentation, narrative significance, thematic meaning, and so on and so forth. All of these and more will factor into my decision, but obviously how these apply to each individual fight will vary. Finally, at the end of the day, it's my opinion. I know for a fact that people are going to hard disagree with some of my chosen rankings, and that's totally fine. Even if a fight is ranked low, it doesn't necessarily mean the movie it's from is complete crap. And obviously there are no objectively correct rankings. If you disagree with some of my choices, let me know in the comments. Now with all of that out of the way, it's finally time to rank every Godzilla fight from worst to best. Starting with number 76, Godzilla the Planet Eater, Godzilla vs Ramen Noodles or Void Ghidorah, I guess. This fight, if we can really call it that, happens towards the climax of the Godzilla Netflix animated trilogy. Now in the Godzilla community, you'll usually find at least a few defenders of each film. Even All Monsters Attack, Son of Godzilla and Godzilla vs Megaguirus have their fans. That's not the case with these films. I have not seen a single person defend this trilogy, and that speaks volumes about the quality of these movies. This is the only fight scene throughout the entire trilogy, and it perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with the animated movies. At face value, the premise and concept sound bloody amazing. The biggest Godzilla we've ever seen has to go up against a literal god from another dimension. Wow! Sounds like the coolest thing in existence, right? Well, in execution it basically amounts to Godzilla fighting off a bunch of floating ramen noodles that quickly surround him until the humans eventually save the day. I mean, what you see is what you get. There really isn't much to this fight at all. The two monsters just flail at each other, barely doing any damage on either side, despite this supposedly being a huge spectacle. I mean, it's supposed to be two gods fighting to the death. It should be impossible to make that concept this lame in execution. But nope, this movie somehow manages to snatch defeat from the claws of victory. One of the coolest fights ends up being the lamest Godzilla fight, period. Mostly because they have to make room for the copious amounts of boring, unwatchable human narrative and lore. Look, I'm the last person to complain about humans in monster movies, okay? I hate the mentality that Godzilla movies should just focus on Godzilla. If they actually followed through with that ridiculous notion, the films would be absolute bollocks, because the human narrative is part and parcel of the movies. However, in this case, the humans very much get in the way of any potentially cool ideas. Remember how Mechagodzilla was turned into a whole ass city? Well, we never see him transform into his kaiju mode because my human lore though. And don't even get me started on this botched attempt at a protagonist, my god. I mean, I could go on about these films, but it doesn't really have much to do with the fight itself, which, as we've established, sucks major ass. So let's move on. 75, Godzilla vs Megaguirus, final round. I know there's some people out there that defend this movie, but I can't really say I'm one of them. The main antagonist, Megaguirus, just sucks. Full stop. She's literally a B-Tech Batra, a flying menace that Godzilla has to defeat, but without the metaphorical nuance, memorable design, or just depth overall that made Batra a badass. Now, to be honest, I think most people would grant me all this. Okay, Shane, this movie isn't that great, that's fair, but second worst fight of all time? Really? Well, yeah, this is probably the ugliest, most vomit-inducing scene in a Godzilla movie. I'm surprised that this film is never included on any worst VFX of all time lists. The green screen and special effects on display are atrocious. While the suit and props look pretty good, they're used to a subpar effect. None of the action feels forceful, painful, destructive, or anything. There's one part in the fight where Megaguirus stabs Godzilla and starts draining his energy, but the moment of impact just isn't impactful in the slightest. It's kind of like stabbing a pillow with a pin. Sure, there was a puncture, but there's little to no force behind it. The worst part of this fight by far is the obnoxious lagging slowdown. Look at the clip I'm showing right now. I must reiterate, this is not edited in any way. This is just how the film looks. I guess the cinematographer didn't know how to change the frame rate on the camera to actually achieve a smoother slow motion effect. Now in fairness, plenty of movies use this kind of laggy slowdown, but it's usually done for artistic purposes like during a flashback or before a huge plot moment, for example. But what's the justification here? All it depicts is Megaguirus flying towards Goji, which is supposed to be fast, so if anything this has the opposite effect of downplaying the abilities of Megaguirus. It also emphasises the god-awful chroma keying. I'm just gonna leave this image on screen so you can just soak in everything that's happening here. Now some people may argue, but what about the fact that they give personality to the monsters and the epic body slam? That was really cool. First of all, the body slam is okay. It's a funny little moment that comes and goes, but nowhere near as legendary or memorable as the Megalon dropkick or Hedorah flying, so it doesn't get any points from me. As for the personality, I mean, sure, I'll grant you that, but the majority of Godzilla films do this as well, so again, no points from me. All in all, a terrible fight, but hey, at least I wasn't bored by it, unlike in Planet Eater. 74, Godzilla 2014, Godzilla vs male Muto. Oh boy, I'm gonna get crap for this one. Before I say anything, Godzilla 2014, awesome film. To this day it remains a damn fine entry in the Godzilla franchise. This scene in particular, awesome scene. It's no surprise this was used in all the trailers and marketing for the movie. The way civilians are terrified, screaming their lungs off at the approaching Muto, only to come to a complete silence upon seeing Godzilla for the first time. The mere presence and aura of this creature is enough to take people out of the moment to gaze upon his glory and awe. It's a fantastic moment and really emphasises the weight Goji carries around with him both on a physical and mental level. Without saying a word, this film has effortlessly established Godzilla as the king of the monsters. And man, the way the scene builds suspense too. After a shot of the male Muto, we cut back to Godzilla's feet, where the camera pans slowly upwards, revealing the monster as he bellows his now iconic monsterverse scream, and then what happens? Why did we cut back to the humans watching the fight on TV? Okay, they're gonna cut back to the fight at hand, right? Oh, what the fu- are you kidding me? This is actually the first Godzilla movie I ever watched. I remember seeing it in theatres when I was around 11 years old or so. The utter disappointment I felt when we got completely robbed of what could have been an epic and memorable fight scene was tremendous. Even then, I was not happy with the outcome of that fight, and that hasn't changed on any subsequent rewatches. I think I get what Edwards was trying to do here. Godzilla's overall appearance was supposed to be concealed throughout the movie, only showing brief glimpses at his feet or dorsal plates until the very end where all the teasing pays off and we get a satisfying climax with the monster in full view. In a similar vein to movies like Jaws, for example. However, it doesn't really work when you pan the camera all the way up Godzilla's body and then cut to him actually fighting the Muto on TV. So instead of the intended effect of building anticipation, the film instead feels like it's dangling keys in front of you. Think of it this way, maybe it's just me, but personally it feels a lot more annoying to have a potentially awesome scene ripped away from us than being shown a mediocre or subpar scene. 73. Godzilla raids again, final round. Now this is better, from a hot take to an agreeable take. Godzilla Raids Again is a movie that everyone forgets even existed. A quick cash grab sequel to the 1954 classic, this movie was made on the cheap. Nowhere is the cheap half-assedness of this film more accentuated than the final fight between Anguirus and Godzilla. Now this is the final bout of the movie, like I said, but this particular fight occurs like halfway through the movie and Anguirus gets absolutely mollywopped. If you've ever thought about why they made Anguirus into an absolute jobber in later films, well the truth is, my man has always been a jobber. Hell, in this film he can't even roll into a ball Sonic the Hedgehog style like he does in Final Wars. The result being a flail-off between him and Goji for 6 minutes until Godzilla bites through his neck, killing him. None of the hits, scratches or bites have weight or impact to them, and to be honest the giant monsters don't feel giant at all. It feels like watching a kid bash 2 dinosaur toys together in an attempt to act out a cool scene. If I'm going to be a bit more charitable, the miniatures and sets do actually look pretty decent, especially the model of Osaka Castle. Speaking of, I also like how instead of instantly sending Anguirus straight through it, they build anticipation with the building slowly cracking until it eventually gives way. It's a nice touch that at least attempts to make the fight more engaging. However, any praise or general charitability I can give this fight are pretty much made redundant because of one huge jarring issue with this scene. If you haven't already noticed, it's the frequent sped up shots. You see, due to a cameraman's error, the footage could not be slowed down as intended, so instead we got this. And I'm sorry, it looks terrible. It takes out the action completely, especially considering this is supposed to be a more serious movie. I know this wasn't how it was supposed to be filmed, but I can only judge what they put out. Raids Again deserves every bit of scrutiny for this crappy footage. The cherry on top of this lame sundae is the fact that while all this is going on, we have to follow this idiotic human subplot involving these 3 bumbling prisoners who are the reason Godzilla started attacking the city in the first place. All of which eventually die anyway, so what the hell was even the point? I don't know, I don't think this film is good. I don't know if you noticed. 72. Godzilla vs Spacegodzilla. Final round. As for Spacegodzilla, I mean, let's be honest people, he is a super mid-villain. I've watched this film twice now and both times I experienced severe boredom at the climax of the movie. And for the longest time I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I mean the suits look bloody amazing, the set is well put together, and while the special effects aren't the best, it's certainly nowhere near as bad as Godzilla vs Megaguirus. So what about this fight makes it such a chore to watch? Well, it's a number of factors working in tandem that make this duel a snooze fest. Nothing exciting or iconic occurs during the whole 18 plus minutes that it goes on for. Let me put it this way, when people talk about some of the Godzilla's most iconic moments, they'll probably bring up the Megalon dropkick, his victory dance, the time he got dragged halfway across the city by a Destroyer, you know, stuff like that. Notice how Godzilla vs Spacegodzilla never comes up in these discussions. That's because throughout the entire fight, Spacegodzilla just does nothing but spam projectiles. Whether it's his beam or the crystals, it's literally all this guy does. And God forbid Godzilla actually gets close, because then he'll just send him packing and start the spamming you. It's like watching someone get zoned out with one projectile in a fighting game. Even if it's effective, it's still boring as hell to watch. There's this whole meme in the community about the Heisei movies being nothing more than beam wars, and to be honest, I think that's an exaggerated characterization of the monster fights in these films. However, Godzilla vs Spacegodzilla is the one film where I'll concede that yes, there are far too many beams. 71. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Godzilla vs Burb / Big Condor. Alright, you can stop your boos now. But please guys, listen, I know, Big Condor is cool and all, but fine, I'll save this fight for the top 5, okay? You happy now? But in all seriousness, I bet half of you watching this video forgot this fight even existed, and to be honest, I don't blame you. The fact that it takes Godzilla even a minute to deal with a stupid bird is just embarrassing. And when I say stupid bird, that's no exaggeration, it's a factual statement. Big Condor is just a big condor, that's it. He's just a burb. And a pretty stupid one at that for attacking Godzilla in the first place. All it takes is one atomic breath to cause this guy to explode, like me. Choose your freaking battles. On the bright side, it does make Godzilla look like more of a Chad to Dio, the girl he has a crush on. I get where Godzilla's coming from. Dio is smoking hot in this movie. It's no surprise really considering she's played by Kumi Mizuno. A Dio? More like damn, am I right fellas? And admittedly, Godzilla has game. But real talk, bro to bro. Godzilla, man, you gotta aim a little more closer to home. I respect the hustle, but let's be realistic here. I don't think biology is gonna cooperate. 70. Godzilla vs Megaguirus horde fight. This fight takes place before the Meganula combine to become Megaguirus, attacking Godzilla in order to feed on its nuclear energy, so they can become more powerful and destroy the world, yada yada. At this moment, they're nothing more than annoying mosquitoes buzzing around Goji, much to his chagrin. Well, him and the humans' chagrin, as their presence gets in the way of their plan to shoot a black hole at Godzilla. Again, this movie is contrived to the nth degree, but regardless. The result of all this is a pretty lame, poor excuse for a fight that somehow lasts up to 3 minutes. Just like the final fight, this scene has some god-awful special effects. The CGI mosquitoes leave much, and I mean much, to be desired. We also get this particularly crap chroma key shot of Godzilla waving his tail in the air. Why they did this in the first place is bizarre to me, because they could have just as easily had the suit actor wave the tail up into the sky or just manipulated that part of the suit after the fact. I don't know. The point is it looks noticeably bad, and the fact that they linger on it certainly isn't helping. 69. Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Tiamat fight. Godzilla x Kong is a badass film with a few flaws holding it back from being a 10 out of 10 blockbuster. This fight is one of, if not the biggest of these flaws. Godzilla is kind of relegated to being a side character in this film in favour of Kong, which personally I don't mind. But of course this is at the expense of Godzilla, which leads to this rather bullshit fight with Tiamat. You see, Tiamat is literally nothing more than a living plot device. The writers need a way for Godzilla to evolve, so they have him randomly go and attack one of his underlings so he can enter hibernation and eventually get stronger. An ability he was never established to have prior. The actual fight itself is meh. I mean, it's not the highlight of the movie, but the CGI still looks great. The reason I hate this fight is for what it stands for. Both in Godzilla's case and the monsterverse as a whole. Godzilla is supposed to be the king of the monsters, a force of nature that keeps all of the other titans in line and in check, only dealing with them if they act out of line or challenge his rule. However, in this movie, correct me if I'm wrong, Godzilla attacks Tiamat unprovoked. Tiamat was just minding his own business when Godzilla came to his crib to selflessly get what he wants from him. Maybe just me, but it kind of makes Godzilla look like less of a king and more of a pompous douchebag. Thankfully it's redeemed later on when he sees Mothra again, finally gaining some sense and eventually teaming up with Kong. But I don't know man, this fight just ain't it. It's also indicative of a larger problem with these movies as a whole. So far the monsterverse has been heavily reliant on the excuse of lacking human knowledge. The idea is that these are ancient creatures shrouded in mystery. Humanity doesn't know a lot about them, so really, anything goes. Sure, Godzilla can kill this random titan and evolve after beating him, because why couldn't he? Look, you can make as many excuses as you want, but it's just lazy writing, plain and simple. 68. Godzilla King of the Monsters Underwater Fight. This entry refers to the fight in King of the Monsters where Godzilla ambushes King Ghidorah in the ocean after their previous forte in Antarctica, because Ghidorah decided to fly away instead of finishing the fight like a pussy. To be honest, there really isn't much to say about this one, other than it's not all that great. This scene plays a significant role in the movie as it's also the part where they hit Godzilla with the oxygen destroyer, which like Tiamat is another monsterverse plot device. Without it, Godzilla would have easily done Ghidorah in like it ain't no thing. Despite its importance, this whole scene is just so underwhelming. Godzilla appears out of nowhere and beats the crap out of Ghidorah, at least that's what we're led to believe as we literally can't see a thing. It takes place entirely underwater and the only view we get is from a bird's eye view shot where we see the occasional silhouette. Kind of like the hallway fight in the Batman, but nowhere near as deliberately apt. It was fitting for Batman as he's a stealthy character who instills fear into his enemies. Here though, it just blocks us from the view of the full fight. On the plus side, the events of this fight do lead to the iconic scene between Ceresar and Godzilla later on, which I'll say is one of the best moments in a monster movie period. They also learned a lesson from this scene in the next film where once again Godzilla dukes out in the ocean, only in Godzilla vs Kong we can actually see what's going on. 67. King Kong vs Godzilla Round 1. This fight is on here mainly due to technicality. Technically they do engage in a one-on-one of sorts, but it's very brief. When I say King Kong vs Godzilla Round 1, I'm talking about the scene when the two cinema titans meet one another for the first time. Unfortunately, they don't become friends or lovers at first sight. RIP Kongzilla shippers, I feel you. Instead, fate and the whims of production companies would have it, they start beefing pretty much instantly. As a Godzilla fan and certified simp of the franchise, I've gotta say Goji clearly has a massive unfair advantage over Kong. While Kong is stuck throwing rocks from below and missing half the time, Godzilla has the high ground, spamming his atomic breath from above. Goji is literally camping like an utter tool, and Kong can't do crap all. Kong himself realises that he's pretty much screwed and decides to bolt. Most of the time I would criticise Kaiju for running away from a fight, but in this instance I can't really blame King Kong for dipping. Honestly, I forgot how disappointing their first encounter was. It's almost like my brain was trying to rid the memory of two Cinema Titans meeting under terrible, unfair, and I don't know how else to put it, but you know, just meh circumstances. 66. Godzilla vs Hedorah Round 2. I think people vastly underestimate how many fight scenes there are in Godzilla vs Hedorah. Round 2 is one of 4 different fights in this film, range from pretty decent to completely forgettable. This altercation between the two monsters falls into the latter category. After getting completely wrecked by Godzilla in his first form, Hedorah retreats to the ocean, returning shortly thereafter in his new flying form, which spreads pollution on a much larger scale than before. Godzilla vs Hedorah is pretty famous for being tonally all over the place, and for some that's what they love about it. I can see why the psychedelic, crazy, unpredictable nature of the movie would be appealing to people. The reason I bring this up is because we get an example of that tonal shift in this scene, where we see a bunch of people collapse and rot away from the smog caused by Hedorah's flying form. Pretty graphic stuff. I can see why the environmental message might work on some kids. But really, that's all there is to talk about, because there's barely a fight at all. Hedorah flies towards Goji. Goji manhandles him until Hedorah breaks free, knocking him on his feet, and that's it. 65. Godzilla vs Hedorah Round 3. Alright, we got ourselves a Hedorah double feature. 2 entries back to back, let's go. This fight happens towards the end of the movie, and by this point Hedorah has fully grown into his perfect form, approaching Mount Fuji in order to kill all of the climate activist partygoers, whilst finishing off the only kaiju that can actually stop him, apparently. I mean, Mothra, Anguirus and Rodan never show up, so I guess Godzilla's all we got. Goji shoves Hedorah to the ground for all of 5 seconds until he gets back up, evolving once more, this time growing 2 more on his head, which grants him magic pollution lasers. Aiming at the ground, Hedorah creates a cloud of smog so potent it knocks Godzilla clean off his feet. Reverting back to his flying form, Hedorah grabs Godzilla, chucking him into a pit and drowning him with sludge. Honestly, I just wish this fight wasn't so damn dark. It's not 2014 levels, but still, it's pretty dark, and this is the Criterion version of the film, the best version you can get. I mean, just compare it with footage from Godzilla vs Gigan. Both fights take place at night, however the lighting is much better in Gigan. Aside from that, it's just a small footnote in this hour-and-a-half movie, so yeah, moving on. 64. Godzilla vs Gigan. Godzilla and Anguirus vs King Ghidorah and Gigan. Not gonna lie, half the fight is not original in the slightest because of the constant use of stock footage. At certain points it's bloody egregious. There's one scene where they use footage from Ghidorah the 3-headed monster and you can literally see Mothra hanging about. She's not supposed to be in this movie at all, by the way, but there she is. How this was overlooked is beyond me, but it's not just Ghidorah the 3-headed monster. We see footage from Destroyah Monsters 2 when King Ghidorah lifts Anguirus. It's the exact same scene, only darkened a little to make it come off as if the scene is taking place in the evening. The result is not convincing, to say the least. During the late Showa era, despite targeting the movie towards kids, the film got increasingly gory and unhinged for some reason. An example of that being in a brief tango between Anguirus and Gigan, when we see Gigan using his chest buzzsaw to split Anguirus' face in half. Like, goddamn. I'll admit that's pretty cool. Well, as cool as a poorly designed weapon can get anyway. Gigan is one of those kaiju that looks cool, but in battle looks like an absolute goofball. At least until Final Wars on Gigan Rex. I also like how the personality of the villain kaiju shines through in this fight. When Godzilla gets knocked down, we see Gigan and Ghidorah continue to taunt and kick him on the ground, even gesturing to each other, telegraphing what they're about to do. In conclusion, this fight has some cool moments here and there, but the sheer amount of stock footage heavily negates its potential impact. You're better off watching this fight on YouTube, as the movie itself kinda sucks and isn't worth sitting through for those brief moments of kinda coolness. 63. All monsters attack. Godzilla vs Gabara. This is pretty much the height of Godzilla being targeted towards kids. Goofy antics, cheesy suits, and a family-friendly message to boot. Here's where the film loses me. It's clearly going for an anti-bullying message, that much is obvious. But the way it goes about it is just so bizarre and unhinged, which is perfectly illustrated in this final fight, or should I say only fight, because half of the movie is literally just reused stock footage from other better Toho movies. Anyway, what do you do when you're being bullied and harassed by someone? Well, you call up your dad, gang up and beat the ever-loving crap out of them. That's what. Hell, even before this fight begins, we see Manila send Gabara flying by jumping on the opposite end of a seesaw. What is Godzilla doing during this, you ask? Well, cheering him on, of course. Well done, son. Solve all of your problems with violence, that's the way to do it. I mean look, they're kaiju so of course their natural instinct is to fight, but that's why I don't think this movie is a good anti-bullying PSA. What makes matters worse is that this serves as motivation for the protagonist, Ichiro, to take on some of the thieves in the warehouse, Home Alone style, instead of staying hidden. Mate, you're gonna get yourself killed. And then at the end of the film he ends up becoming friends with the people bullying him. I mean, what the hell even is this movie, man? Maybe growing up is just vastly different in Japan, because from what I remember, none of this ever happened to me. Weird messaging aside, I think the actual fight itself is not great, but it has some goofy charm to it. I did get a hearty chuckle out of Manila sending Gabara flying, and there's some decent wire work when Godzilla chucks Gabara over his shoulder like a boss. 62. Godzilla 2000 Spaceship Fight. At the start, I clarified that it has to be a fight with Godzilla versus another kaiju / mech / alien. Basically another opponent of similar size and strength. Now this spaceship isn't a kaiju per se, at least I don't think it is, but it definitely gives Godzilla a run for his money. Plus, given the fact that we barely know anything about the craft or its prior passengers, I thought that, you know, what the heck, and just put it on here. It's a decently length fight after all, around 5 minutes. This is one of 2 entries that sort of bend the rules slightly, but hopefully you'll see that I have good reason for putting them both on here. So how is the actual fight itself? Hardly noteworthy in the slightest. The UFO isn't exactly an exciting opponent, it's just a UFO. Obviously this thing doesn't have any physical prowess, so it resorts to restraining Godzilla by using all the power lines underground, which is actually pretty unique and nice looking. Especially the part where Goji struggles to open his mouth in an attempt to fire his atomic breath. Though saying it's nice looking isn't really saying much in the grand scheme of this film. Especially considering right after he escapes, we get this horrendous shot of Godzilla spiking the shit with his tail, which looks like a particularly bad nostalgia critic skit. And believe it or not, that's far from the worst effect in the movie. I don't know, this fight exists I guess. On to the next ranking. 61. Ebirah Horror of the Deep. Godzilla vs Mothra. Godzilla fights Mothra a heck of a lot in his 60+ year film legacy. His tango with our beloved Moth in Ebirah Horror of the Deep is by far the most overlooked, and for good reason. Godzilla is straight up pissed at Mothra, but he can't really do much of anything because the baby he wants to bone might get caught in the crossfire. So he just kind of stands there as Mothra flaps her wings, blowing him away in a scene which is just a worse version of their encounter in Mothra vs Godzilla. Because instead of a theme park being torn to shreds in a massive egg bouncing in the wind, which emphasises the sheer force of her wings, all we get is some trees blowing in the wind, with the raft the island is building somehow not being phased in the slightest. Again, Mothra vs Godzilla, giant theme park being torn down. Ebirah Horror of the Deep, puny raft remains unaffected, yet Godzilla is knocked on his feet. How does that work? I don't know. Don't question it, just don't question it. Afterwards she flies away with the islanders in hand, and that's the movie. Godzilla either fighting or teaming up with Mothra is one of the universal constants of the franchise. They're a legendary combo, but not every appearance is going to be a home run. 60. Godzilla vs Hedorah, round 1. The second last fight I've got to cover from Godzilla vs Hedorah. I think this fight is better than the other 2 rounds for 2 main reasons. Those being the cinematography and the initial meeting. I don't know why, but for some reason the cinematographer locked the fuck in for this scene. There's some really good shots here, like the long shot showing the 2 kaiju on opposite ends, and this particularly dark, ominous composite with Hedorah overlooking the city. It draws your attention immediately to his bright red eyes, menacing the protagonists below. I wasn't a Godzilla fan as a kid, but I do remember learning about the character on YouTube alongside his villains. 2 of them actually scare the bejesus out of me, one of them being Hedorah because my god this motherfucker looks creepy as hell in certain areas. It's a testament to just how good the suit design is. When it comes to the actual meeting, they don't immediately start beefing like in King Kong vs Godzilla. Instead there's a brief body language display between the 2. Especially with Godzilla's bear impression. I heard somewhere that Nakajima studied bears and elephants for his role, but I don't know whether that was just for this movie or all of them. It's certainly the most pronounced in Godzilla vs Hedorah, what with the claw swipes and head tilts. I don't know if it's my favourite thing in the world, but I can appreciate Nakajima trying something new with the character. 59. Godzilla 2000 Orga Fight. Godzilla 2000 is about as average as you can get for a final fight, held back by a few flaws that keep it from being among the GOATs. After the spaceship absorbs Godzilla's DNA, it creates this PS1 styled CG abomination, which then eventually transforms into Orga. Unlike the aforementioned abomination, the Orga suit actually looks really nice, and so does the Godzilla suit, if I haven't mentioned it already. I'd say it's in the top 5. I mean, they must have thought it was good considering they used the thing in the next film. The first few minutes of the fight is a 2v1 match as the spaceship is still around to ruin Goji's day. Thankfully, Goji finally gets rid of the thing for good after one well-placed atomic breath splits the thing in half, blowing it to smithereens. Good riddance. With that out of the way, it's time for the final showdown, which in all honesty is alright, I suppose. Orga doesn't really have any special abilities except from giving Godzilla the big suck, draining his energy so he can continue to evolve, which reminds me that they literally made 2 movies back to back where the villain tries to steal Godzilla's energy. Whatever. The sound design is actually pretty good here. When Orga bites into Goji's arm, they heavily boost the crunch of the impact. Unfortunately, this is where the downsides make themselves apparent. The special effects are pretty poor in this movie, that much we've established already. However, it doesn't get much better with the finale. After Godzilla fires off an atomic breath at Orga, we get this pretty shoddy looking CG effect of the skin tissue going back. The absolute peak though is when Orga tries to vor Godzilla whole, which in concept sounds terrifyingly cool, but in practice doesn't look very convincing. They just overlaid a mouth onto the suit, so Godzilla doesn't really look bothered by the fact that he's getting eaten alive. The special effects really hold this fight back, and to be honest, Orga isn't really much of an opponent. A close quarters kaiju who sucks at close quarters, so there, 58. Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Godzilla vs Mothra. If the phrase middle of the road were placed into a movie making machine, this is the film you would get out of it. Tokyo SOS is so mid that I can hardly think of another word to describe it aside from mid. Like a bowl of oatmeal that goes in and out without much notice. You know you just consumed something, but it doesn't really feel as if you did. Plus, it's literally just the first film again, but with Mothra thrown into the mix, which brings us to the fight. In this movie, Mothra and the Shobijin are moral grandstanding douchebags, telling humanity that using the bones of the old Godzilla to power Kiryu is immoral, and that they will defend humanity in his place, despite literally not doing that in the last film. Despite the douchery, Mothra still answers the call and ends up fighting Godzilla. And yeah, it's pretty much the same as any other Mothra fight. She flaps her wings, sprays him with pollen until he gets annoyed to the point where he fires atomic breath. It's almost beat for beat the same as the original Godzilla vs Mothra, only nowhere near as iconic, and in an inferior movie. Not much to say about this one really. The Mothra prop is actually really well done and special effects have improved a lot since the former Millennium entries. Overall though, it's a fight I suppose. 57. Godzilla Final Wars. Godzilla vs Kamacuras. Okay, full disclosure, the next 3 fights including this one are all from Final Wars. These fights are in a very similar vein to each other and I think you'll see how once we get through them all. None of them are that much better than the other, so I put them all in close proximity. Still in order of least to best of course. All of these fights suck on their own, but working in tandem they're beyond badass. This whole movie is pretty much a compilation of Godzilla travelling the world, kicking ass and taking names, and it's bloody awesome. All of the fights are amazing, even the ones that last 20 seconds in total, like this one. And no, that's not an exaggeration, that's literally how long the fight lasts. Kamacuras jumps out at Goji only for him to catch and throw him right into a transmission tower, impaling him through the chest. It's simple but effective, and damn satisfying too. Anytime Kamacuras takes an L is a W in my books. 56. Godzilla Final Wars. Godzilla vs Ebirah and Hedorah. Another short and sweet fight. We see Godzilla's atomic breath fire upwards into the night sky with Hedorah and Ebirah tumbling down from above, one after another, falling on top of each other as if it were like a Looney Tunes cartoon or something. But then, almost immediately dispelling that notion, Goji rises out of the ocean in this like majestically badass manner, firing another atomic breath so powerful it pushes back the building they fell on a few meters before they both evaporate into an explosion. Like, I don't know dude, there's only so many ways I can say badass. Far from the best fight in the movie, especially considering we don't even see what happens underwater that sends them flying in the first place, but still, in the grand scheme of the movie, it's fun and goofy. 55. Godzilla Final Wars. Godzilla vs Kumonga. This big ass spider tries to subdue Godzilla by bobbing and weaving a web around Goji in order to restrain him. I don't know where I was going with that. This doesn't go very well, as Godzilla actually grabs one of his webs, going on to spin Kumonga around in circles, sending him flying. What edges this fight over the others for me is not only the swinging, which I mean, come on, you gotta admit that's cool, but also the music. I can't really say much about the score of these films, given the fact that I can't actually show any of it. But trust me when I say Godzilla Final Wars is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in a movie ever. The track in this fight is called King of Monsters, and it's an absolute bop. Not even the best track in the movie as well, oh no. We'll get into that much later on. Another thing I haven't mentioned about these fights is the fact that after every victory we get to see X, the main villain, have a breakdown over the loss. Whoever plays this guy deserves an Oscar, I don't care, man. Because he's one of the best antagonists of the Godzilla franchise. And the actor does a great job capturing his utter insanity and out of control emotional tantrums. 54. Godzilla raids again. Round 1. The first ever kaiju fight in Godzilla history, and it's probably the best part out of this dull ass movie. And it happens right at the beginning, so not a good sign. For the time it was made in, the composition on display here was actually really good. When we see Godzilla, it's in this decent looking composite shot depicting the two protagonists underneath Godzilla towering over them. The composition also plays into the main gimmick of this scene, which is the slow reveal of Anguirus. They did an excellent job building anticipation here, as at first we see Godzilla prattling about on his own. Then we see a stubby pair of arms. Something more is going on here. After a few more glimpses we finally get the reveal, and to be honest, the suit isn't that bad. Not the best Anguirus suit, but still I think they did a bang up job. The major setback to this fight would be the actual fight itself lacking impact and the goofy ending. Raids again has a serious sound design problem. None of the hits feel like they have any weight to them, either due to quiet or non-existent sound effects. On top of that, the way these two just stumble into the ocean never to be seen again until 45 minutes later is just goofy. But in a lame way, not a charming way. 53. Godzilla X Kong The New Empire, Godzilla vs Scylla. Okay. So, I got to about rank 60 when I realised this fight exists and was like, oh shit. They certainly don't waste their time with kaiju action in this movie. I mean, this fight takes place while the opening credits are still rolling. Don't get me wrong, it's a good adrenaline booster right at the start of the movie, setting the tone for the rest of the running time, but like, this soon though? Regardless, this is a pretty neat little fight. I'm particularly fond of the part where Godzilla steals Kazuya's Dragon Uppercut move from Tekken, knocking Scylla's ass straight to the ground. Plus the atomic breath charge reminds me of the spaceship battle in 2000 where his mouth was also restrained. Only here it's way cooler, because the monster explodes in a giant pile of Nickelodeon gack. Doesn't make much of an impression, but certainly a badass moment. 52. Godzilla vs Megalon 2023. The first of the G-Fest short films, and in my opinion the weakest. Not because of the action, that's the awesome part. It's because half of the running time is dedicated to human stuff that has no real influence on the actual fight. We get handheld shots of humans talking about what's happening, but I don't understand why this was needed at all. In the end, we're just left with more questions than answers, if I'm honest. Regardless, as I said, the fight itself is awesome. Megalon has never looked better. The addition of irises to his eyes really exaggerate how imposing this guy is, and the fact that the fight takes place at night so we can see his eyes glow only go to strengthen that point. But in all honesty, I think Godzilla is the one who gets the biggest glow up. In this short, they give him a new ability where he can channel atomic energy into his fists for an atomic punch. And they even found a way to include his dropkick from the original classic film. Very cheesy stuff, but at the same time, very fitting and apt. It's a nice callback to the original, whilst setting out to do something new. 51. Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs Ghidorah, Antarctica fight. For some reason this movie is completely caked in the Smurf filter, the scene in particular being the most blatant. It doesn't ruin the fight, however, I'm not sure if that's an intelligent way of putting this, but there's just too much blue. With that aside, I do think this is a solid fight all in all. What we can see of the CG is out of this world. Right from the beginning we get this shot of Ghidorah and Godzilla menacing each other from opposite ends of the screen. You know shit is about to go down and it ain't gonna be pretty. At least for the humans anyways. Speaking of which, I think they're incorporated really well into this fight. To elaborate, I think the scene excels at transitioning from a monster to human action. Godzilla is outsmarted by Ghidorah, dodging his atomic breath and firing back with blades of his own. Goji gets knocked onto the ground when we see the humans running below. It's a ginormous and really well executed spectacle. Not a sentence everyone would agree applies to this movie, but in my opinion for the most part it succeeds with flying colours, ironically enough. 50. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla II, Godzilla vs Rodan. Not a confrontation people often talk about, which is a shame because I feel this fight is a little underrated. On the surface it's your standard Rodan vs Godzilla fight, and these tend to go the same every time. Rodan flies head on into Godzilla, knocking him down and leaving him vulnerable for Rodan to peck to death. Nice going, Rodan. A surprisingly effective strategy until Godzilla decides enough is enough and begins fighting back. Except this time around, Goji begins violently choking Rodan in a raw display of intelligence. We also get a close-up of this phenomenal Rodan prop too. The Heisei series just can't stop winning with their suit and prop designs. If I'm being honest, the true hero of this movie is Rodan, full stop. I'll get into why when we talk about the final fight later on, but yeah. In retrospect, it's a pretty good fight. 49. Godzilla vs Spacegodzilla Round 1. Now this is more like it. Unlike the final fight, which drags on for a million years as we're forced to watch Spacegodzilla spam projectiles 24/7, this first round is a lot more concise and to the point. Spacegodzilla arrives on Earth and immediately begins terrorizing Godzilla Junior, shooting lasers at him and later encasing him in crystals for the rest of the movie, unprovoked. I should mention he literally just does this to be a dick. I saw this image on Twitter recently that was like, fun fact, Spacegodzilla is the first monster to attack Godzilla emotionally by stealing his son. And I mean, it's true. He doesn't have anything to gain except traumatizing both Godzilla Junior and regular Godzilla. This is where Godzilla's characterization comes in. We can really see the growing bond between Goji and his son bear fruit in this scene. As soon as Junior sees Godzilla, he runs to him for safety, a direct contrast to Mechagodzilla II where he's reluctant to go home with him at the end of the movie. Godzilla comforts and protects him from Spacegodzilla's spamming, taking the brunt of the attacks in a selfless act of guardianship. It's a pretty cool scene which just goes to show Godzilla's growth throughout all the Heisei films. This is not the same monster we were introduced to in 1984. If Spacegodzilla wasn't such a lame kaiju in such a lame movie, I might have appreciated him as a villain more. He's the first evil kaiju acting of his own volition. I mean, Gigan was pretty evil, and there's an argument to be made Ghidorah was too, but they were always under orders from aliens or something like that. Everyone guesses up Destroyah, but Spacegodzilla did it first, so he deserves credit in that respect. 48. Godzilla vs Mothra. Godzilla vs Larvae, Mothra and Batra. Man, poor Mothra. Barely a minute out of hatching and she's already getting obliterated by Godzilla and Batra. As soon as she's able to get close, Godzilla just yeets her away, and hell, if that wasn't bad enough, along comes Batra to rub salt in the wound, throwing her further away out at sea. I mean, Jesus guys, give her a break. It's an okay Larvae fight, and the inclusion of Batra, who's a pretty cool and unique variant on Mothra, certainly spices things up, so it isn't just beat for beat the Showa movies. The thing I like most about this scene is probably the score. The music overall is fantastic in this film. Certainly, look up 1992 Mothra theme, and it'll be pure bliss to your ears. But here, I think we get a remix of one of the older tracks on the original Mothra vs Godzilla. Don't quote me on that though, I don't fully remember, but regardless, it's a phenomenal score and a decent scene. 47. Godzilla Final Wars, Godzilla vs Gigan. We have ourselves another Godzilla quickie with this ranking, and let's be honest, who here doesn't love Godzilla quickie? But in all seriousness, this is the first fight of Godzilla Final Wars, and man does it set the tone for the rest of the movie. Like the other fights, it happens under a minute, yet every second is somehow oozing with badassery. Right away we see just how powerful this Godzilla is, blasting Gigan's head clean off in this gorgeous looking shot that tilts downwards, revealing the big man himself. Keep in mind that Gigan was built up early on in the movie like this major threat, with a whole ass redesign and everything, which is yet another awesome aspect of this fight. Gigan's redesign slaps so hard, and thankfully it's not the last time we see it. 46. Son of Godzilla. Godzilla vs Kamacuras. A newly born Manila is being bullied by a bunch of Kamacuras on a monster island, which catches the attention of Godzilla, who proceeds to kick their asses. Not sure if he's doing it because he hates the Kamacuras or he feels sorry for Manila, probably both. Goji in this movie sort of strikes me as a loner who eventually steps up and does the right thing, kind of like Joel from The Last of Us, which, now I think about it, is a pretty funny comparison. But like, it's true, to a certain extent. Godzilla doesn't take to Manila initially. In fact, when he arrives at the fight, he seems to take pity on the poor sod, but is still hesitant to take him in. It's a testament to good kaiju filmmaking that we can derive all this from a few sound effects and motions from guys in suits. It only gets better when the fight begins and Godzilla starts body slamming the piss out of these dumb monsters. Seriously, it's just awesome, and the Foley sounds do a lot of the work to make it feel more powerful. The body slams are good, the suit body language is good, therefore the fight is good. The only downside is the score sounds pretty whack at the start of the fight. Kind of a nitpick, but still. Also, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but Manila sounds exactly like the baby penguin from Mario 64. 45. Godzilla Fest, Gigan attacks. When we first see the two of them, they engage in an old western style stare down via these close-ups that cut back and forth between them. A cold display of animalistic intimidation, which I think plays into the element this short film pulls off the most successfully. The personality of the two monsters really shines in this short, which is made pretty evident throughout. In one moment after Godzilla charges into the fight, we get a close-up where Gigan gets a pretty good hit in, scratching him right across the cheek, which Godzilla actually notices, caressing his face in a pissed off manner, while Gigan taunts him like an asshole. Pretty appropriate for the character. I mean, he had his fair share of taunting in Godzilla vs Gigan too, so it makes sense. In the previous short, the personality of the monsters didn't really play into the fight, whereas this one, it does. I don't know if it was intentional, but it's also reflective of the movies each monster came from, in terms of emphasis on kaiju expression. This is also capped off by the ending where Godzilla baits Gigan into thinking he beat him, playing off of his ego, only to then grab his claws and fire off one final atomic breath for the finishing blow. It's a great short film that I strongly recommend you watch, if you can find it, that is. Toho, you suck. 44. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla Round 1. This fight, well, isn't much of a fight if I'm honest. Akane gets Kiryu to fire a bunch of missiles at Godzilla, to no effect. Akane then gets Kiryu to fire a laser, which in fairness actually does push Godzilla back, seemingly hurting him. Seeing the effect it had on him, she prepares to launch Kiryu's Unibeam, so to speak, and it's here where we get one of the cooler moments of the movie and why this fight actually rocks. Godzilla lets off one of his signature roars, which triggers the old Godzilla's memories, whom is still conscious inside Kiryu. Holy crap! I remember leaning forward in my seat to an unhealthy extent when this happened, just sitting there in awe. Plus it helps that we get a really cool transition to show the regaining of consciousness. We get a crash zoom on Mechagodzilla's eye, which then fades to a bunch of DNA and eventually footage from the 1954 film, only for it to crash zoom back out of his eye as he stood there frozen, Akane unable to control him. Godzilla takes his opportunity to bolt, and that's pretty much the fight. Not really a fight, but their confrontation leads to one of the cooler moments of the film, so credit where credit is due. 43. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla. Godzilla versus fake Godzilla. Going up against a mechanized version of yourself is just an easy winning formula. Sonic, Superman, Motu Patlu, I mean I could go on. As for this first meeting, I'm happy to report that it's a certified hit. At this point in the film, Mechagodzilla is still posing as normal Godzilla, despite Anguirus exposing a chink in the disguise earlier on. Now that the two kaiju meet face to face, it's time to do away with the charade as Godzilla blasts away piece by piece Mechagodzilla's outfit. Eventually the monkey aliens from Black Hole Planet 3, it's a long story and someone's messaging me. The aliens decide enough's enough, burning away the disguise where the real suit is revealed, via this badass sequence of shots. The camera slowly peds up, cutting back and forth from that and various close-ups showing each critical aspect of the Mecha Kaiju. Not only does this suit look amazing, but the close-ups foreshadow what kind of weapons Mechagodzilla will use later on in the film. If that wasn't cool enough, after the two engage in battle, the fight ends Dragon Ball Z style with a massive beam clash that downs both kaiju. There's no better way to demonstrate that both monsters are on equal standing in terms of power, and man is it awesome. 42. Godzilla Tokyo SOS. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla Final Round. Once Kiryu arrives on the scene, no, not that one. The climax really starts to pick up and improve where Godzilla and Mothra left off. At first we get some standard Mechagodzilla trademarked missile spam, even taking cover behind a building at one point, though Godzilla quickly wisens up to this, shooting an atomic breath straight through the building, knocking Kiryu back into another building, and then we get this awesome shot of Godzilla walking straight through the building, unfazed, like holy shit. That's how you sell a kaiju right there. The fight would have been over at that point if Mothra hadn't stepped in, tanking a hit from Goji's atomic breath. This gives the pilots enough time to get Kiryu back into the fight, and it's here where we get this. As here we get probably the only downside to the skirmish. Eventually they engage in CQC and Kiryu just kind of awkwardly tosses Godzilla over his shoulder. I mean, we don't fully see what happens, it just cuts to Godzilla flying halfway in the air like, mate, I want to see how he got there. Whatever. We need to see Godzilla going after Mothra's larvae, who have arrived to help them on. Right before they're attacked, Mothra tanks yet another full blast atomic breath, which completely disintegrates her. Then we see the two larvae's eyes turn completely red with rage, which to be honest I don't know how to feel about. It is kind of cool, but we've never seen Mothra exhibit this kind of behaviour before. Even in the original film where their mom also dies. Mothra is definitely way more brutal in this movie. I mean, the Shobijin literally threatened to declare war on humanity. I know Mothra has attacked humanity before, like in her debut film for example, but that was because the humans had stolen and were exploiting the Shobijin. Here, humanity is threatened for using Kiryu to defend themselves from Godzilla despite having no other means of self-defense, and Mothra doing fuck all beforehand. Her reasoning made a lot more sense in the 1961 film than it does here. That's why in my opinion this is one of the weaker incarnations of the character. Regardless, they still aid Kiryu in defeating Godzilla by covering him in webs to which Kiryu sacrifices himself to bury Godzilla with him on the ocean. It's a fitting end for the character and a decent send-off when we finally see Kiryu's sentience manifest fully, saying his goodbyes to the pilots before they abandon ship. It's a cool fight with a cool ending. even if Mothra feels a bit off in this incarnation. 41. Son of Godzilla. Godzilla and Minilla vs Kumonga. In Son of Godzilla, the final is actually one of the more wholesome moments in the Godzilla franchise. It's here where we see the depths of Goji and Minilla's relationship and how the two have slowly but surely grown close to one another throughout the entire movie, despite the awkward circumstances of their meeting. It's a side to Godzilla we rarely see, but it's heartwarming nonetheless. Like earlier in the film, Godzilla actually considers Minilla a priority, making sure he doesn't get in harm's way when confronting Kumonga. In one moment, moving him away from a seemingly dead Kumonga just in case. Here's where we get to the downsides. There's this weird looking sequence where the camera cuts back and forth between close-ups of Godzilla and Kumonga, which is clearly meant to build like anticipation and tension for what might happen next. However, it doesn't really work when Godzilla looks like he's drunk off his ass. I'm sorry, but I absolutely cannot take this seriously when he looks like, well, this. Also, the reason we got here in the first place is because of Godzilla's continued atomic breath attacks on Kumonga, which barely look like they have an effect on the monster. Now, to be fair, that might be due to the Kumonga prop and how it was handled. Obviously, this isn't a guy in the suit. You have here some honestly damn fine marionette work. The way he moves just looks amazing, especially for the time. And hey, after it's all said and done, we get a lovely heartwarming ending with the two kaiju comforting each other during a snowstorm, so all is forgiven. 40. Godzilla Gmk, Godzilla vs Baragon. One of the few times I've actually felt sorry for Godzilla's opponent. To call this scene a fight would be vastly overselling the events on screen. Baragon is one of the most adorable kaiju out there, like, just look at him. Look at him. But cuteness aside, let's face it, he's practically useless in a fight. I haven't seen Baragon vs Frankenstein, so maybe he puts up more of a valiant effort in that, but here he's pretty much lamb for the slaughter. The slaughter of course being our main man Goji. He manages to attack Godzilla successfully once, but he soon adapts, making Baragon's strategy of jumping real hard ineffective. This fight also brings out the genuinely evil nature Goji possesses in this movie, stomping Baragon into the ground and even when he's trying to escape, vaporizing him with his atomic breath. He could have killed him instantly, but instead chooses to toy with him. Finally, before we move on, I have to mention how flawlessly the action itself is pulled off. Shusuke Kaneko has mastered the art of kaiju confrontations. You can really see and feel the weight behind every punch, behind every move in his films. Anyone who's seen the Gamera Heisei trilogy can testify to that fact. But it's just as well demonstrated here too. The very ground shakes with every impact and it all congregates into making a decently awesome little fight well before the climax of the movie. 39. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla. Fake Godzilla vs Anguirus. This is another fight where its inclusion on this list is contestable, like with the spaceship fight from Godzilla 2000. Godzilla and Anguirus don't actually have a rematch in this movie, they're still buddy old pals. As we later find out, Anguirus was fighting Mechagodzilla, who at this point was in disguise. There are two reasons why I included this fight on the list of rankings. One, we don't actually know that this isn't Godzilla the first time the audience sees this confrontation. We know something is wrong with Godzilla, but we don't know what, and we certainly don't know that there's a mecha kaiju under there, at least initially. Granted, the audience could reasonably guess as much, but still. Second of all, it's a pretty cool and wildly unhinged fight, so I thought it would be worth including. The thing I like about this fight is all the subtle clues that could potentially be overlooked, indicating that this is not Godzilla. For instance, the first time I watched the movie, I didn't even notice the metal sounding footsteps this Godzilla has, even in disguise, which is a nice detail to include. One that works in tandem with the raw and exposed shiny area which Anguirus reveals during his attack. Speaking of Anguirus, like Baragon in GMK, I just feel so bad for the dude. Mechagodzilla has no chill at all, kicking and stomping Anguirus, slamming him on the ground multiple times as he cries out in pain. But that's not even close to the worst of it. If you're wondering why I said this fight was unhinged, it's because it ends with fake Godzilla ripping Anguirus' jaw clean off as an unholy amount of blood spurts out of his mouth. Oh my god, man. That's gore. That's gore of my comfort character. On top of that, you can literally hear the poor guy gurgling on his own blood. And once it's all over, he can't even roar correctly what with his jaw hanging loose. Jesus Christ almighty. Like, keep in mind this is the last time we see Anguirus. His next appearance 30 years later in Final Wars. Is he okay? Did Anguirus' jaw ever heal? Did he die? Jesus. 38. Godzilla vs 4 Jet Jaguar. If you weren't sold on Jet Jaguar before, then you will be now. Essentially, this is just a 10-minute episode of Ultraman or something like that, with Jet Jaguar running circles around Godzilla with a plethora of martial arts moves. I think they made Godzilla a lot more agile in this compared to the prior film, Gigan Attacks, as he can actually keep up with Jet Jaguar. Just to emphasise how agile and free-flowing this fight is, I want to highlight a little section that stood out to me. At about 3 minutes and 30 seconds in, Goji knocks Jaguar back, cutting to a low angle shot of Jaguar putting his foot down. Jaguar's resolve is still strong and unwavering, hence why he's still facing towards this overbearing threat. The two run towards each other, and as the camera zooms in, BAM! Superman punch straight from Jet Jaguar. Oh, you think he's done? Godzilla swings his tail, Jaguar ducks and slowed down to perfection, wha-bam! Kick straight to the face. I mean, I could go on, this whole fight is so hype. Of course I can't move on without mentioning the ending. Godzilla appears to have Jaguar beat, but before we can finish him off, out comes a laser from off screen. The music cuts off, as we wonder what the hell happened, only for it to cut to an explosion. Cue the arrival of King Ghidorah, accompanied by Godzilla's rage theme from GMK. The cherry on top of this oh so sweet sundae is that, like with the Megalon short, they harken back to the original movie in a new way. Jaguar helps Godzilla to his feet, shaking hands with the kaiju as they team up to face an even bigger threat. 37. Godzilla vs Hedorah, final fight. While I personally don't have much fondness for Godzilla vs Hedorah, the impact the final fight had on people is undeniable. At the climax of the movie, the humans have devised a plan to shock Hedorah with electrodes, drying out and thus killing the monster. The means of actually doing this aren't exactly portable, and so they inadvertently need Godzilla's help. I think this is the first time Godzilla has actually willingly worked with the humans. He displays a strange amount of intelligence in this movie throughout, which is capped off by him intentionally trying to restrain Hedorah in the beam of electrodes. I think his increase in awareness works for this movie, as the messaging is a lot more poignant and serious this time around. Even Godzilla takes climate change seriously, so you should too. But of course we have to talk about Godzilla flying, one of the most iconic Godzilla moments of all time, whether that be to his detriment or his benefit. Some people say that this moment sucks because it completely ruins the serious message and somewhat serious tone of the movie, but you've got to remember it's a movie made for kids. I don't think it would be a very effective message for children if the whole movie was just doom and gloom 24/7. They're here to say Godzilla be Godzilla and blow stuff up, so in order to reach them they have to do both that and spread awareness about the dangers of pollution. Regardless, it's an iconic final, so that's why it's here in the first place. 36. Godzilla vs Biollante, Round 1. Round 1 refers to Godzilla's first encounter with Biollante when she's still in her flower form. To call Biollante a monster just feels improper to me. Technically it's accurate, but really she's a victim. Basically, one of the characters, Dr. Shirogami, had a daughter who was killed during a terrorist attack. In order to keep her alive, well, kind of, he injects a rose with her cells, keeping her alive in a sort of sentimental way. Later he joins the JSDF, gaining access to Godzilla's cells, at which point God knows why, but for some reason he decides, you know what would be cool? Injecting Godzilla's cells into my daughter's rose. Let's see what happens. As you'd expect, it all goes horribly wrong, and that's basically how we got here. Though the messed up thing is that on some level she's still conscious, which means she's fully aware of the pain inflicted on her by Godzilla when he mercilessly spams atomic breath at her. That's what makes this fight so tragic. The fact that she's in idle form and can't really do much other than restrain him only makes matters worse. It's a kaiju fight on technicality, but what we see is actually a pretty sad series of events, which makes me appreciate this movie that much more. 35. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla II, Round 1. I think the reason why this film works so well is the fact that it defies a lot of the conventions we've come to expect of the Godzilla franchise up until this point. Even ones established by the Heisei entries. The most obvious one being the complete role reverse with the humans being the bad guys and Godzilla being the good guy, which is perfectly demonstrated in their first confrontation. Here, we are rooting for Godzilla. The reason he is even heading for the city in the first place is to find his ill-begotten son, taken away by the JSDF. Also, in a strange twist on what we've come to expect, Godzilla shows a lot more emotion here than the humans. Now, despite being a man in a suit, Godzilla has always shown emotion in some form or another. I'm not denying that. But obviously the humans are a lot more emotive than the giant rubber suit. But not in this instance. In one moment where Godzilla is being shocked by the piloted Mechagodzilla, we can see a mouth agape roaring in pain. The humans, on the other hand, stone-faced throughout the entire ordeal. Hell, even Mechagodzilla 2 looks cold and emotionless. This is backed up by his theme song, which plays throughout the fight. Slow beating drums and loud commanding tubas dominate this bout, emphasising the menace that is humanity this time around. It's a really cool twist, not only on Mechagodzilla but also the standard conventions of the franchise, which is really damn cool. 34. Mothra vs Godzilla, Larvae fight. For context, Mothra has just passed away after taking a proper beating from the big man himself. Fortunately though, she was able to save her children from Goji's wrath, to which they hatch, revealing the two larvae inside. accompanied by the beautiful score of this movie. Akira Ifukube, I don't know if that's pronounced it, but you never fail to impress. It's up to them to stop Godzilla's rampage over on Iwo Island, where a class of children are currently trapped, and at his mercy. This is what Mothra should be, a noble protector of humanity and the Earth who cares for children and the innocent, like Gamera before her, willing to put herself in harm's way to save them. That's what sets Mothra apart from her other kaiju compatriots, and why this movie's version of the character trumps Tokyo SOS by a long shot. As for the fight itself, it was the first to establish what kind of weaponry Mothra has at her disposal, which in a larvae form isn't much. A few webs and that is about it. In fact, that's how this fight ends, frustrating Goji with their silk, sending him tumbling into the ocean. Not the last time they would do this to an enemy either. Tokyo SOS. King Ghidorah. Speaking of establishing trends, we also see Mothra go for Goji's tail, which is a strategy she would use many times throughout her appearances. However, I think it works best here as the two larvae work in tandem, strategizing how to approach Godzilla, who is clearly a far more powerful opponent. And that aspect makes this fight pretty neat, if I do say so myself. So yeah, it's a great final to a great film. Moving on. 33. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Godzilla vs Ebirah Round 1. Alright, let's just get this out of the way because of course this is the one thing people talk about with this fight. The rock throwing. Where are we on this one, guys? Are we pro rock throw or anti rock throw? Personally, I'd say the former. Ebirah is quite a cheesy movie, all things considered, so the rock throwing only adds to that cheesy vibe this film intentionally shoots for. Plus the special effects here are actually pretty decent for the time. I especially like the part where we get a bird's eye view shot of the humans as the rock rushes by them, creating a large wave. The rock looks tiny when these two adorable monsters are hitting it back and forth, so it's easy to forget the thing is bloody massive. Aside from the rock, it's just a good fight, so there's not much else to say. In retrospect, this movie makes me laugh at the fact that we have two crustaceans in the Godzilla franchise who are completely different from one another. I mean, first you have an all-powerful god of destruction who is pure evil, and then you got Destroyah, a pathetic weakling who can barely harm a fly. Actually, I forgot there's 3 crustaceans now, including Scylla. The real question is who would solo who, Ebirah or Scylla? 32. Ghidorah the 3-headed monster, Godzilla vs Rodan. Okay, this is a great fight. Not only because the suitmation is solid, but also because the context behind it is hilarious. Godzilla and Rodan spend half of the movie squabbling with each other, even when Ghidorah hatches from their egg and starts wreaking havoc. I'm pretty sure this is the first time they've ever met too, so for some reason they just despise each other. It even gets to the point where Mothra steps in to remind them of the situation. Guys, there's like a giant dragon destroying everything in sight with anti-gravity. You know, maybe you should like do something about it, you know? We then get this funny ass scene with Godzilla and Rodan chucking a rock back and forth, and Mothra just watches on in bemusement. It's so petty and stupid, I love it. Mothra has red eyes in this movie, which I'm pretty sure is just a design choice, but my headcanon is that she's constantly pissed off, having to leave her island to deal with these two chuckleheads. Humour aside, I also like how intertwined their conflict is with the human story. At one point, Rodan drops Godzilla onto a transmission bowl, right on the groin. Ouch. Though painful, it does inadvertently save one of the main characters' lives, who was about to be electrocuted to death after assassins tampered with one of the machines. It's a long story, but man, talk about cause and effect. 31. Invasion of Astro Monster. Godzilla and Rodan vs Ghidorah Round 2. Invasion of Astro Monster is in the top 3 best Godzilla movies of all time, don't at me, okay? This fight scene only goes to further that statement, plus it's not even the best fight in the movie. No, we'll get to that soon, but the climax of the film is still an absolute joy to watch. After the humans free our beloved kaiju from Zillion mind control, they immediately engage in an all-out brawl. And man, let me tell you, it's one for the ages. Godzilla and Rodan may not be friends, but as this is a continuation of the last film, they know Ghidorah to be the bigger threat. So it's time for a tag team. The suits all across the board are at their best in this movie. A perfect balance between not too goofy and not too serious. Especially Godzilla's, which looks phenomenal, at least in comparison to the other Showa movies. Speaking of Goji, I like how agile and athletic he is in this movie. We see an example of that here when we start throwing hands with Ghidorah. Look at the camera cutting between Godzilla's swift movements, close-ups of his barrage of punches, motion blurred pans to the right and left that show the whole scene, whilst maintaining the energy and fast pace of the fight. This whole movie is just incredibly well shot. That goes double for the kaiju scenes. Cinematographer Hajime Koizumi straight up knocks out all the park here. Fight comes to a close when Rodan lifts up Godzilla, rams him straight into Ghidorah as they both are sent packing down the mountain, Crash Twin Sanity style. Brownie points for anyone who gets that reference. They even bothered to show a giant tsunami wiping out a small town after the two monsters land in the ocean, accentuating the sheer size of these lads. It's the little things that work to make this movie so damn amazing. 30. Godzilla vs Kong boat fight. Criticise Wingard's films all you want, but you cannot deny that the man knows how to make a badass blood-pumping slapfest. Hence why all of them are in the top 30, including this one. Godzilla does one of his signature dragon uppercuts, causing Kong to fall into the ocean when we get this amazing moment of Kong struggling through his restraints, attempting to get above water but failing because he's weighed down by the boat. The CGI is phenomenal here, as the whole thing is depicted upside down, giving this whole trippy, disorientating effect, which is pretty appropriate for a scene out in the ocean. Also, kudos to the sound team for acing this fight. The loud thuds of each impact combined with the constant transitions between clear and muffled audio as the two monsters duke it out below and above water is just mwah, beautiful. The fight ends with Kong and the humans playing dead, tricking Godzilla into stopping his onslaught, which kind of proves that they're all way out of their league compared to this guy. I'm sorry Kong fans, but that has always been the case ever since the original film. Kong always needs a power up in order to level the playing field. 29. Godzilla x Kong the New Empire, Godzilla vs Kong. Okay, Godzilla really has no chill, like, at all. Almost as soon as Kong arrives in Cairo, Godzilla bolts to his destination to throw hands. It's actually kind of adorable how Kong is trying to get him to stop, like at the start when he's putting his hands up, but Godzilla just doesn't give a fuck. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. The main reason why this fight rocks is because it's loud, insane, and bloody awesome. At one point, Godzilla, for whatever reason, decides to suplex Kong right off the pyramid. Like, dude, is there a lore reason for this? Methinks that's not the case. Godzilla prepares one last atomic breath to finish Kong before Mothra pushes him back, much to Goji's surprise. The VFX team did a great job showing emotion on Godzilla's face, which is surprisingly expressive for a giant monster. I also like how he takes note of Gia as well. It's a really cool moment, and the final shot of the three monsters is iconic. 28. Godzilla vs King Ghidorah, round 1. Can someone explain to me how he is able to watch this fight? Where's his feed coming from? Who's recording this? How is this possible? Whatever. The government and military have live footage of the event, so I guess it's not impossible. Anyways, the fight you ask? Yes, it's great. Actually, it's one of many showdowns I point to when people claim the Heisei Godzilla series is nothing but beam attacks, because there's clearly more to this fight than that. For context, the Futurian time travelers take the Japanese back to the past. Not to play the shitty games that suck ass, but to make sure Godzilla was never created. It turns out they were tricked into creating Ghidorah, who is an even bigger threat to Japan than even Godzilla was. So the protagonists once again go back to the past to place Godzilla in another nuclear bomb site to make sure he's awakened alongside Ghidorah so they can both duke it out. Time travel shenanigans are a pain. The two monsters shortly after meeting engage in some good old CQC, Godzilla brutally slamming Ghidorah into the ground over and over. Unlike the Showa era and Monsterverse, the Heisei films had awesome fights whilst trying to make them as realistically slow and lumbering as possible. At least to a greater extent than the Monsterverse and Showa era, which is what sets them apart from the films that came before, and it's pulled off surprisingly well. The impact on each slam is felt tremendously. Overall, a brief but memorable and well executed fight. 27. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, Godzilla and King Caesar vs Mechagodzilla. Now, I have dubbed this fight Godzilla and King Caesar vs Mechagodzilla, but really King Caesar doesn't really do much of anything helpful here. I mean, it takes like 5 minutes of singing to wake this guy up, and when he actually gets his lazy ass to the fight, it doesn't take much for him to go down. The best we can give this sorry lad is a participation trophy. But with that aside, this fight, while not the best Mechagodzilla fight, is still one to remember. Right out of the gate, we get this really cool handheld camera movement where we move from Godzilla's perspective to Mechagodzilla's. The mechanized kaiju should be done for in this situation, but then he starts spamming from all directions. Lasers, missiles, electricity, you name it, he's got it. Which was actually foreshadowed upon his reveal in an earlier fight, if you remember. The special effects look particularly good when Mechagoji surrounds himself with an energy shield. Though achieved in a goofy manner, the effect appearing on screen is clean as hell. I think Jun Fukuda, I'm sorry if that's not how you pronounce it, but I think he just loves gore because Godzilla's arms erupt with a mountain of gushing blood in this fight. Kind of like Anguirus earlier on, but nowhere near as violent. The final part of the fight where Godzilla twists Mechagodzilla's head clean off is another example of great practical effects, whilst being a satisfying way to cap off the action. Though to be fair, how he even got to that point is kind of BS. Godzilla pulls a King Kong and magically gets a new power right out of his ass. In this case, becoming a magnet and pulling Mechagodzilla in. Yeah, that's kind of bollocks, but oh well, it's still a good fight, so I'll forgive it. 26. Godzilla vs Mothra 1992, Godzilla vs Mothra and Batra. The two Moths are both fighting Godzilla through circumstance to start with. They don't like each other, but they share the same goal. That is until Batra takes a bad hit, to which Mothra, in a show of compassion, flies down to his level, even healing and comforting him despite his unprovoked attacks earlier on. You'd think it would be hard to tell, but it's pretty evident that Batra is moved by this gesture. Even more so when she starts taking Godzilla on by herself, which we can see by the consistent cuts to close-ups of his face watching on. Mothra's compassion eventually bears fruit when Godzilla gets the upper hand, knocking her down to the ground, and just when she's about to get crushed by a giant Ferris wheel, along comes Batra, catching it just in time and throwing it right back in Godzilla's face. The two Moths are officially fighting side by side in a battle for Earth. Now add the incredible score on top of all that and boom, you've got a gorgeously awesome scene. I've said this before and I'll say it again, this is definitely way more of a Mothra movie than a Godzilla movie. But hey, the Mothra stuff is phenomenal, so I can't complain. 25, Godzilla Final Wars, Godzilla vs Scylla. You might be wondering why I put this less than a minute long joke fight all the way up here, and yes, while it is a joke fight, that's precisely why it is so bloody amazing. You can tell some of the crappy quality on this is done on purpose. Not only do they have this god-awful CGI Scylla running around, but they also put this ridiculous rock song in the background to make it more epic, to a cartoonish extent. Plus, Godzilla beats him in less than 30 seconds. Scylla jumps at him, Godzilla tail whips his ass back down, and then effortlessly disintegrates him with one atomic breath. If all that didn't make it obvious enough, the scene ends with it's the ultimate middle finger towards the American 1998 Godzilla film, and it's awesome. Well deserved too, because that movie stinks. 24, Godzilla vs Megalon, Godzilla and Jaguar vs Megalon and Gigan. Now both films have egregious amounts of stock footage, like I said earlier with Godzilla vs Gigan. I mean, in this film there's even a part where Gigan crashes into a building that was destroyed in World Children's Land from the last film. I mean, guys, come on, really? So unlike Godzilla vs Gigan, this one has the added benefit of being iconic and memorable. Regardless, realism is pretty much thrown out the window in this fight, as the four monsters basically act out a wrestling match. Godzilla body slamming Gigan and Megalon left, right and the centre. They couldn't have made it more obvious that he's the face this time around. Oh wait, they did, because he literally shakes hand and buddies up with the underdog that everyone was rooting for throughout the entire movie. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad thing. Actually, quite the opposite. It works wonders for this film and feels more appropriate considering this is the film with Jet Jaguar. A clear nod, or rip-off, of Ultraman and the tokusatsu genre as a whole. Plus, the action is pretty decent here. There are a few awkward moments here and there, like when Godzilla hits Megalon with a tree. It looks quite bad. Despite that, most of the close quarters fighting is extremely fast paced and adrenaline pumping. So many cuts and close-ups to make even Taken 3 blush, but somehow here it doesn't feel overbearing. Probably because they know when to let the cameraman take a breather to build suspense, like when both the antagonists go missing, and Jet Jaguar and Godzilla are trying to predict their next move. But of course, the reason anyone even talks about this fight is because of the dropkick. Personally, I think it was done world better in the Megalon short from 2023, but it's still an iconic moment, and that only adds to the wrestling vibe this whole scene is going for. 23, Ebirah Horror of the Deep, Godzilla vs Ebirah Round 2. Let's be real for a second, Ebirah sucks. I think we can all agree on that. A giant crustacean, but not the cool and edgy kind. Yet somehow he still puts up a fight against our beloved atomic dinosaur. I mean, this whole movie is named after him, for crying out loud. Talk about overselling a mofo. But I digress, this movie is still fun, and the same goes for the fights, for a few main reasons. First of all, the cinematography here is really well done. As soon as Godzilla enters the ocean, the camera cuts back and forth between multiple Dutch angles, subconsciously conveying this feeling of disorientation, which makes sense because it's, you know, water and stuff, but also because it reminds us just how much things have gone askew. We get these types of shots here because the fate of the islanders are at stake. The circumstances are especially dire now as they're trying to awaken Mothra so they can be brought back home safely without using a boat. If anything gets in the way of that, they're screwed. The fight also strikes a nice middle ground between being brutal but not to a gratuitous extent. It all ends with Godzilla ripping Ebirah's arms clean off. A glorious spectacle to be sure, and one that doesn't have a comical amount of gore. Anguirus. 22. Godzilla 2014. Godzilla vs the Mutos. This final battle more than makes up for the blunder that was the first match. I only wish I could have seen what was going on half the time without turning the brightness up on my TV to max. Seriously guys, don't get the Blu-ray version, it sucks ass. At this point in the Monsterverse, they were still going for a semi-realistic looking action. Slow lumbering movement and giant single hits. Definitely a stark contrast to what the Monsterverse would eventually become. But that doesn't mean the action here is bad by any means. The Mutos are supposed to be a world-ending threat to the point where humanity is willing to team up, so to speak, with Godzilla in order to beat them, and that can really be felt here with how much Goji struggles with them. Though it also goes to show how much of a sheer force of nature Godzilla is. The monsterverse version of Godzilla is like an apex predator, an alpha titan who reminds other kaiju who's in charge. This is the first film that adopts that principle, which is demonstrated by the brutal defeat of the female Muto. He could have just killed her, but he chooses to do so in the most gratuitous fashion possible, firing an atomic breath down her throat. I mean, goddamn. Extremely violent and extremely cool. While the human characters are pretty meh in this film, the cinematography whenever they're on screen is really well executed. This shot of Brody looking at Godzilla is practically burned into my brain. Brody in the foreground is so out of focus to the point where his form is near unintelligible, which I think connotes just how different the worlds of man and kaiju really are, whether it's intentional or not. 21. Godzilla vs Destroyah. Godzilla Junior vs Destroyah. In the Heisei movies prior to this one, Godzilla Junior was pretty much a joke. An adorable and lovable joke, but still a joke. In Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla II, Junior was still a baby and all he really did in that film was eat cheeseburgers. Then in Spacegodzilla he was supposed to be aged up a tad, but his design sucked. They basically made him a Manila 2.0, both in appearance and action. However, along comes Godzilla vs Destroyah and Junior has finally come into his own. Still small compared to Godzilla, but still able to kick ass and take names, as evident by this fight. Destroyah is both an absolute unit and an absolute menace, attacking Junior unprovoked, sending him crashing down to the floor. Destroyah attempts to go for seconds by killing Miki Saigusa, but Junior wakes up and blasts him in the nick of time. It's never really made clear whether Junior actually has any care for humanity on any level. Personally, I like to believe that he still remembers his time with the humans in Mechagodzilla 2. If Godzilla can appear to reminisce on his time pre-mutation and even seemingly cry over it like he did in King Ghidorah, then I don't see why Junior wouldn't remember his youth. After this really cool looking shot of Miki and the other woman whom I don't remember observing the confrontation, the two start throwing hands. Spoilers, it doesn't go well. At first, anyway. Destroyah's modus operandi is to inflict as much pain as possible on his opponent, taking pleasure in doing so, which we can see come into play in this scene where Destroyah lands directly on top of Junior, crushing him with an array of spikes while injecting him with micro-oxygen. In other words, the stuff that killed the original Godzilla in 1954. Yeah. That stuff. So you can imagine how painful it must be. Actually, scratch that, you don't need to imagine, as we can literally see Junior choking on his own phlegm. Like, Jesus man, leave him alone, you asshole. Thankfully, this isn't how the fight ends. Junior manages to fire off a powerful atomic breath through his own phlegm and spit, seemingly killing Destroyah. A powerful scene and a satisfying defeat for the kaiju antagonist. Good thing he never shows up again. Good riddance. The best part about this fight is that it perfectly shows just how much Junior has grown in the past few years, able to defend himself from the likes of a bloodthirsty psychopath. It only gets better as even decades later, thanks to the short films, we get to see even more of Junior now in his prime with Megalon and Gigan, pulling off moves Heisei Godzilla could only dream of. It's really cool to see, and probably even cooler if you're a lifelong fan of the franchise that grew up watching these movies. If you weren't sold on Junior before, well you should be. His evolution from Prince to King of the Monsters is just a must-see for any kaiju fan. 20. Godzilla vs Hedorah 2021. How many instances can you think of where that's the case? Probably none, not even here in all likelihood. I'm sure most would disagree with me. Regardless, no one can deny just how spectacular the short film is, based pretty much solely on the action and score. There's no real story here. Hedorah is attacking an oil refinery as per usual, and whilst hitting a pollution vape, Godzilla appears behind him. Cue the Godzilla theme and epic kaiju stare down. Immediately we get some fantastic cinematography when the two monsters start running at each other, cutting back and forth between low angles of the two, emphasising their size, concluding on this beautiful shot directly underneath the two of them. A civilian's eye view, you could say, that not only immerses the viewer in the brief action, but also shows that the two are on equal standing via the symmetry of the frame. Symmetry that remains intact even when the camera turns clockwise, which is a real nice touch. I think the only downside to this shot is the part where the camera heads to the right and the confrontation gets obscured by buildings for 30 seconds or so. It will do a similar thing in Gigan attacks, only it's better there as you can actually see the action. 19. Godzilla vs Kong, Hong Kong fight. I think the backdrop alone is worth the high placement on this list. We always like to think about the Godzilla vs Kong matchup. Who would win? What powers would they have at their disposal? Etc, etc. But we never think about where they would actually fight, and I think that's one of the primary reasons why Adam Wingard's movies kick so much ass when it comes to kaiju kicking other kaiju's asses. We'll see more of that shortly, but a great example of it is here with Godzilla and Kong's rematch. The neon lights of Hong Kong compensate for the fact that the fight takes place during the night, resulting in a well lit scene where the array of brightly lit colours actually work to highlight the duel instead of distracting from it. This is because the two game changing abilities that will have the biggest impact on the outcome of the fight are also bright, standout colours. Godzilla's atomic breath and Kong's axe, which both glow a bright blue. Through this fight location, the audience's attention is constantly focused on the two foremost colours on screen, and given their importance, it just makes for an absolutely badass confrontation. Even looking past that, the CGI here is pretty much flawless. We even get a nod to the original film where Kong shoves his axe down Godzilla's throat, harkening back to when he did the same but with a tree many years ago, which I love it. The best part, however, takes place towards the end where Godzilla goes full on croc mode, chasing after Kong on all fours. Is this his optimal modem of attack? Hell no, but he's doing it just because he can, in an effort to assert dominance, which to his credit actually works, scarring the ape in the process and ending the fight by stomping on his chest. This guy is so alpha that even the red pill community would blush. Make way for your new king, plebs. 18. Godzilla vs King Ghidorah. Godzilla vs Mecha King Ghidorah. Can we all agree that Mecha King Ghidorah is one of the coolest, most underutilized kaiju in existence? Seriously, this thing just oozes awesomeness. Though kind of morbid considering Ghidorah was once one of these cute little things. Still, I am glad to report this awesome design is used to full effect in this fight. Emmy, one of the time travelers, feels guilty about her role in creating Ghidorah, so she goes to the future and returns with this bad boy you see before you, to finally put an end to the Godzilla threat. We get some really cool composition of Emmy inside the mech where the camera is flying all over the place in tandem with the chaotic nature of the fight. Ghidorah's flight, Godzilla's atomic breath, all of this and more make the camera go haywire, which sounds like a bad thing, but it actually goes to accentuate the constant change in stakes and who has the advantage at any given time. Plus, I'd be remiss not to mention the godlike composite shot depicting news anchors running out of a room about to be destroyed. After some beam clashes, Emmy eventually shackles Godzilla, flying him away from the city only for him to break free, causing the two of them to fall into the ocean. Fortunately, Emmy made it out just in time, much to the rest of the cast's relief. In conclusion, it's a really great fight, and while Emmy is not the most memorable human character, her redemption arc is still a satisfying watch. 17. Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla II. Round 2. It's time for Godzilla and Mechagodzilla 2 to have their climactic rematch at the end of the film, and boy is it epic. The two immediately start clashing with a literal beam clash and a nice little nod to the first movie. Just like that film, both opponents take severe damage from the impact, but they must fight on for our amusement. You can tell Godzilla is infuriated here because even after getting Mechagodzilla in a headlock and throwing him to the ground, he continues his assault while he's down for the count. Which is nice attention to detail when you take into account the fact that this entire movie has been him trying to find his kid. Anyone that gets in the way of his goal will face nothing but the worst of his wrath. Which also adds to the character of Goji. There's clearly a greater consciousness there. That much was made obvious after his supposed crying in vs King Ghidorah, but here it's concentrated anger due to his missing son. A parental instinct to protect children, which is something we can all empathise with. Godzilla would have gotten the dub right then and there if Mechagodzilla hadn't received an upgrade, now having even more lasers to spam at Godzilla. Not sure if this is a callback to Mechagoji's spam in the show era, or if this is just a product of it being a Heisei era film. The spam is too much for Godzilla, and after they target and shock his weak points, our beloved dinosaur starts keeling over. Until the real hero of this movie shows up, to nurse him back to health, so he can finally finish Mechagodzilla 2 once and for all. Rodan is genuinely the underdog of this movie. A sharp contrast from prior and even future appearances where he's just a stupid looking douchebag. In his mind, he thought that Godzilla Egg was his child, which is literally the only reason why he fought with humanity and Goji in the first place. Even after it hatches, revealing Godzilla Junior, he still feels the inherent need to protect the child, sacrificing himself to save someone who does have the power to stop the humans. This touching scene accompanied by this beautifully calming remix of Rodan's theme from the show era. I'm sorry, but this movie delivers the theme of parenting far better than the Son of Godzilla. Okay, that's my hot take. 16. Godzilla vs Gigan Rex. This short film, man, this bloody short film. I remember when this came out, literally everyone was talking about it. It took the Godzilla community by storm and probably had some semblance of reach outside of it too. Unlike some of the other G-Fest short films, you can watch this one on YouTube. The video is currently sitting at 11 million views, so clearly this ain't some random poxy little thing. And you can rest assured that this short film was well deserving of all the hype and praise it received at the time. Where do I even start? I mean, first of all, the models look outstanding. Especially Gigan, who looks simultaneously fresh and new, yet harkens back to the classic Showa design. And of course, we can't forget about Gigan Rex. They keep finding new ways to reinvent the guy, and it gets better each time they do it. First we had Final Wars Gigan, who was already a badass, and then here comes Gigan Rex with a brand spanking new colour scheme and buzzsaw whips. Not only is that in of itself freaking awesome, but it helps that they're used to great effect in this fight, slashing building after building only for Godzilla to catch them like he did Gigan's hooks in Final Wars. I'm pretty sure that's not a coincidence. While I'm not as big on Godzilla Junior's model, the shot of him at the end walking through a sea of flames goes so hard, even I can't deny how epic it is. Did I mention the score of this fight? When Godzilla Junior appears, we get the classic JSDF theme from the original 1954 film. There's also a moment in the fight where Junior takes on multiple Gigan at once, and we treat to this classical piano piece. It's so bizarre for a Godzilla film, but it works so well, but I can't help but want more. All of this on top of the fact that this is a continuation of the Heisei films, with Godzilla Jr. taking the reins this time around. They even got actor Megumi Odaka, who plays Miki Saiguse in the Heisei films, to voice the opening narration. This film is a 6-minute love letter to Godzilla and the Heisei era, and it's pulled off tremendously well. Even if the animation is a tad clunky at times, the models and ideas behind this short overwhelmingly power through. 15. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, Godzilla, Rodan and Mothra vs Ghidorah. The first of many times Godzilla and friends, despite their differences, would be brought together via the unifying goal of beating the crap out of King Ghidorah. In my opinion, they started out pretty strong for a first run through. After Rodan and Godzilla finally stopped bickering like babies with one another, they decided to join Mothra's battle with Ghidorah. It's here where we are treated to 8 minutes of classic Showa greatness. It's pretty apparent in a rather infamous moment where Ghidorah electrocutes Godzilla's crotch, and then later is asked like, geez, give it a rest, mate. Obviously this is far more brutal than Anguirus' jaw, but it has the added benefit of being comically funny and silly to a charming extent. But don't be fooled, this fight has a lot more going for it than goofiness. One moment that will go down in the history books is the part where Mothra rides Rodan, forming a sort of cannon on his back and hailing down silk all over Ghidorah. It's such a cool and creative moment, and I'm shocked there aren't more like it. As soon as I saw that on screen, I was like, yep, it's official, this rules. Now if they could use more than just Rodan's theme over and over again, it would be perfect. It kinda sucks that Invasion of Astro Monster came out directly after this film, overshadowing it in every way and probably for good reason. Still, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is a great watch and a fun ride the whole way through. 14. Godzilla x Kong the New Empire, Godzilla and Kong vs Shimo and Scar King. If you haven't already noticed, Adam Wingard absolutely dominates the art of the fight scene. I'm probably a broken record at this point, but still. This is primarily because Adam and crew take into account factors outside of the fight itself. Most importantly, the environment and backdrop of the showdown. We saw great examples of this in Godzilla vs Kong on the boat and Hong Kong scenes, a trend which definitely carries over to this movie, especially the initial confrontation in Hello Earth. It's not enough that they are fighting in a lush nature landscape, no. Try a lush nature landscape with no gravity. This is one of the most, if not the most unique fight in all of the Godzilla movies. It's such a refreshing and immersive spectacle to the point where your mind refuses to wander elsewhere. Plus, these circumstances have undue effects on the combatants. Mothra gains a huge upper hand here, effortlessly taking down Big Monkey one by one, and even attacking Shimo with no recompense. Godzilla and Kong on the other hand, they're pretty much fish in a barrel. There's not much they can do against Scar King and Shimo, who have a clear range advantage. The fight continues in Brazil, where the four main kaiju duke it out some more. This is where we see a little monster characterization come into play. Kong's positive attitude and defense of Tsuko throughout the film works to his favour in this scene. Right at the last second where it seems Scar King has the other hand, Tsuko steps in, destroying the crystal that controls Shimo whilst saving Kong in the process. There's so many variables in this fight, and seeing how they all play out and pay off is just satisfying as hell to watch. 13. Godzilla Final Wars, Godzilla vs Anguirus, Caesar and Rodan. If you've ever wanted to see Godzilla basically become John Wick, then this is the fight for you. It's hard to explain why this fight is so awesome without just describing the actions taking place on screen. Anguirus rolls into a ball and starts flying towards Godzilla, which he then tail whips him into Rodan, eventually circling back to King Caesar, who then boots it like he's trying to win the World Cup finals, only for Godzilla to evade, much to Caesar's chagrin. Well, by the look on his face and the movement of his ears, probably a lot more than chagrin, but still. All of that is insanely awesome, but what complements it all is the fantastic soundtrack. I've already complimented Final Wars' score, but this fight actually has my favourite track in the whole movie. It's called Ready to Rumble, and it perfectly syncs up with everything happening on screen. Like in the opening of the fight where the camera peds up and down with both Anguirus and Godzilla in frame, emphasising their difference in size. After a short stare down, they bolt towards each other. Cue the epic music. It's a 2-minute long set piece that I'll never forget. Plus it made Anguirus cool for like 20 seconds, so there's that as well. 12. Invasion of Astro Monster, Godzilla and Rodan vs Ghidorah, Round 1. The reason why I think this fight is actually better than the final match is because of the amazing set and of course that moment. I'm pretty sure this is the only Godzilla fight to ever take place on another planet, which makes this movie rather unique. Thankfully, they use this opportunity to great effect, as the set here looks gorgeous. Planet X is pretty much a barren wasteland until you see the beautiful planet in the background. Definitely a contrast to the current environment, but emphasises the beauty of space even if its denizens are ugly in nature. On top of that, the fight itself, while brief, is still a great time. I especially like the part where Godzilla does a Luther's press on Ghidorah, taking him to the ground in seconds. This is actually what causes Ghidorah to flee, resulting in that moment. If you somehow don't know, it's Godzilla's infamous victory dance. Not only is it iconic and practically burned into every fan's brain at this point, but it's also a sign of things to come. 11. Terror of Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus. This fight has pretty much everything you need. Great cinematography, like when Godzilla and Titanosaurus meet for the first time and we get a low angle tilt showing the devastated aftermath of the latter's rampage. One of the better city destruction scenes in a Godzilla movie, and it's literally all done with Titanosaurus' tail, and it's chock full of nail-bitingly tense moments. Godzilla is not quite the absolute unit he was in vs Megalon, with both Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus giving him a good run for his money. Close to defeat, the humans managed to gain control of Titanosaurus. Jesus, they need to shorten his name, leaving only one opponent for Goji to face. No easy task when faced with the master of spam himself. I think the best moment of the whole bout is when Godzilla rips Mechagodzilla's head off just like he did in the prior film. That's it, right? He's won. That's what the movie expects us to believe initially as the music stops. But after the smoke clears, bam! Crash zoom on Mechagodzilla's secondary head. Goji's still got some work to do, so yeah, not much else to say really. Amazing fight. Alright folks, the time has come. The top 10 best Godzilla fights in the franchise so far. This is definitely going to be the most contested section of the video, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Number 10, Godzilla vs Biollante, final round. Right out of the gate, can we all agree that Biollante's second form is quite possibly the best suit ever made in the history of Kaiju suit making? Like, goddamn man, this thing looks just gorgeous. Extremely large, very imposing, and intricately detailed. I can't help but look on in sheer admiration. If you've ever seen the behind the scenes photos of this movie, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. The amount of wires needed to operate all of Biollante's tentacles is insane. Well, more like insanely worth it, because my god, the final result is breathtaking. This is why suitmation should be taken seriously as an art form. Nothing about this is half-assed, goofy, or outdated. It still looks just as good today as it did back then. I'm 100% serious when I say this film is on par with movies like The Thing in terms of practical effects. I know the wind is blowing in the direction of CG, especially with this franchise, but man am I going to miss the absolute peak suit making of the Heisei era. As you'd expect with this fight being placed this high in the list, the suit is used to phenomenal effect in the movie. Biollante is an absolute unit, at least on a size level, which the movie makes a point to show you. One of the first shots we get of the two kaiju is a close-up of Biollante, which slowly zooms out, becoming an over-the-shoulder shot where we can see just how large this lass is from Godzilla's perspective. I also like the brutality of this fight. There isn't a comical amount of gore like in the Showa era, but we do get a lot of green goo spewing from Biollante's orifices. There's one moment in particular where she stabs Godzilla through the hand, which may not seem like much, but combined with the squelchy sound effects and pain roars, it's pretty visceral, which I think is really cool. Going back to her size, even the ground violently shakes underneath every time she moves. Biollante is a force of nature. I mean, quite literally, being a plant and all that. But this is where we get to the part which separates this fight, and by extension this movie, from others of its ilk. Biollante may be huge and deadly looking, but at the end of the day, she's a plant. A plant with a young girl's DNA implanted within, making her conscious on some level. Biollante is actually one of the most vulnerable opponents Godzilla has ever faced, which we see reflected in the design and the fight itself. Observe Biollante's deadly looking design more closely, and you'll see her glaring weak point on display for everyone to see. During the fight, she's constantly taking damage, and it doesn't take much for her blood to spill. There's a tragic element to this fight, as Biollante is just a freak accident as a result of the cold hand of science. We see this tragic element play out at the end of the fight when Biollante photosynthesizes into space, and we see Erica's consciousness go with it. Sure, the premise sounds insane and stupid at face value, and to some extent it is, but give it a chance and you'll find a great hidden gem which needs to be seen by more people. 9. Mothra vs Godzilla, Mothra fight. This fight is better than the finale in my opinion because it's the origin point of many tropes in the Godzilla franchise, and it's simply put, bloody iconic. This is the third kaiju period that Godzilla has ever faced, and you'd think the fight itself would be on the weaker side given Mothra as an opponent is fairly weaker than the likes of Kong, but Nope, it actually works a lot better because there are stakes in this bout. Godzilla is going for Mothra's egg containing her children who have been away from home this entire movie. Obviously she wants to protect them, so there's a sense of desperation here. Something we see clearly demonstrated when she starts pulling him by his tail as far away from the egg as possible. I also think the destruction of the theme park is pretty well executed. It reinforces how mighty Mothra is as a kaiju despite what some may think, and the Foley sounds do a lot to help in this regard. At the end of the day, it's just a really memorable and iconic fight, which set the gold standard for fights in the Showa era moving forward. 8. Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs King Ghidorah Final Round. I think this fight has the best Godzilla entrance ever. That's pretty high praise for such a divisive movie. King Ghidorah is a seemingly nigh unstoppable kaiju, not only totaling Boston, but managed to get all the other titans to wreak just as much havoc all across the world. Just when it's starting to look like a victory for Ghidorah, a familiar face arrives. Along comes Godzilla strutting into Boston with this big dick walk, eyeing Ghidorah, fully intending to take back his rightful place as the king of the monsters. Perhaps that's the coarse way of describing it, but goddammit, it's an accurate one, okay? Even Millie Bobby Brown's impressed with Godzilla, looking at him like, yeah, there he is, there's our boy. Fuck him up, Godzilla, you got this. Now add in a dope remix of Godzilla's classic theme in the background and boom, you've got a banger scene. This movie was pre-Junkie XL days, so the movie score is actually good throughout the whole film. I don't remember who did the soundtrack for King of the Monsters, but all the epic orchestral remixes of classic Zilla tunes are simply amazing. I never really understood the complaint that the consistent cutaways to the humans ruins the fight scenes. It's the #1 critique I hear about this movie, and I couldn't disagree more. First of all, the humans are kind of, integral to the kaiju action, especially in the finale. The whole reason Ghidorah is in Boston in the first place is to destroy a signal created by one of the human characters which calms the other titans. Godzilla wouldn't have even shown up were it not for Serizawa's sacrifice. Second of all, we never truly cut away from the kaiju stuff. Like the scene in Antarctica, kaiju and human screen time smoothly transition to one another, especially with the fight taking place directly above the human drama on the ground. Third of all, the major moments of the fight are allowed to fully play out without much, if any, interruption. Take for example one of my favourite moments when Mothra joins the fight, webbing Ghidorah's head to a building. After trying to break free, we get this really raw shot of Godzilla's reflection in the building as Ghidorah turns to face him. And that's just one moment of many iconic events in this decently lengthed fight. As Ghidorah shooting lightning in the air, brightening the night sky, Ghidorah dropping Godzilla from above the clouds, and of course the final part of the fight where we see Godzilla chomping down on one of Ghidorah's still alive heads. Every fight scene in the Monsterverse so far ends with Godzilla doing the most rawest thing imaginable, and I think King of the Monsters is on top of that list. The ending of the movie only goes to strengthen this point as we see all of the kaiju, even the ones that shouldn't be there in the first place, kneeling before Godzilla. He's quite literally taken back the mantle of King of the Monsters, and it's so damn satisfying to see. The only reason this Ghidorah fight is ranked slightly lower than the others is because of how dirty they did Mothra in the scene. Instead of being a character, she's pretty much made into an invincibility star from Super Mario Bros., giving Godzilla the power he needs to obtain an easy dub. That's always bothered me, but it doesn't take away from the grandness of the grand finale, so I can't complain too much. 7. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, Kiryu vs Godzilla Final Round. I knew this fight was going to be among the goats within the first minute of the scene starting up. Godzilla is about to let off an atomic breath in the direction of innocent people when all of a sudden Kiryu comes charging in, knocking Godzilla on his arse and saving the pedestrians in the process. To cap it off, Akane gives him a sort of nod of acknowledgement which I think encapsulates her entire arc thus far, which is the main reason why this fight is ranked so highly. Ever since -1 dropped, people have been non-stop gassing up Koichi, and for good reason, but Koichi's arc in -1 is not the first of its kind. Akane did it first, and she's one of the better characters in the Godzilla franchise. Like Koichi, Akane's actions result in the deaths of others, and because of that she endures a lot of struggle. Eventually she works her way back to a position of responsibility, and we see that bear fruit in the final fight of the movie. That little nod of acknowledgement is not only for the civilians' sake, but also Akane's. She's acknowledging the fact that she won't make the same mistake again. She'll put others first before herself, as that is her duty as a JSDF pilot. Godzilla is still a threat, and so she still has a job to do. Thankfully, the rest of the fight fully delivers from the promising first minute. Judging purely on spectacle, it's just as great in that respect as its representation of Akane's character growth. There's a specific part of the fight where Kiryu casts off his jetpack and starts brawling with Goji mano-a-mano, adapting to the attacks that were previously successful like his atomic breath and tail whip, dodging accordingly and pretty much running circles around Godzilla. We get an extended sequence of the two throwing hands, all of which is shot from a low angle, heading and tilting from streets to rooftops. It just looks fantastic, I don't know what else to say. The ending of the fight really makes me think that Yamazaki and crew must have taken influence from this movie for -1. Akane tries to hit Godzilla with the .0 cannon in order to freeze him permanently. She tried once before but it missed, so this time she grabs Godzilla, flying him out into Tokyo Bay, hoping to hit him with the attack point blank. I know I'm a broken record at this point, but Akane's character growth shines through once again. She engages in this moment of self-sacrifice primarily to save one of her crew members, the same crew member that earlier on blamed her for their brother's death. Akane went from being looked down upon and hated to being admired and respected, a journey we see throughout the whole film. She's been trying for years to atone for the mistakes she's made, and this scene solidifies that she has indeed earned that atonement. Thankfully she survives the ordeal, but so does Godzilla. I love this final shot of Akane where she gazes down, reflecting on what just happened, only to fix her gaze back onto the retreating Godzilla. She may have won the fight, but she hasn't won the war. Now with friends and allies by her side, she's more determined than ever to fulfill her duty. Until they write her out of the sequel, that is. 6. Godzilla Gmk, Godzilla vs Mothra and King Ghidorah. The climax of Gmk is amongst the greatest in the entire franchise. Everything the film has been building up to finally comes to a head, resulting in almost 20 straight minutes of pure chaos. If you're a fan of Godzilla as this unstoppable force of pure destruction, then you'll be in heaven with this movie. Godzilla just refuses to go down, even with both Mothra and Ghidorah on his ass. Their attacks barely phasing him. Hell, even after all the action is over, this guy is still alive. Only through sheer luck does he manage to finally go down, and spoiler alert, it ain't permanent. The core theme this movie consistently hammers home to the audience is the idea that revenge is a source of constant rage and incalculable destruction, a force Godzilla perfectly embodies with his onslaught against the Japanese people and the three guardian monsters. This is perfectly realised towards the end of the film where Godzilla rises out from the ocean. It seems like all was for naught. The protagonists are about to die by Goji's hands when all of a sudden his atomic breath shoots out from a hole in his body. A hole we saw earlier was caused by attacks from both King Ghidorah and a submarine which Godzilla boarded. Yet despite this, Godzilla still keeps trying to fire his atomic breath, which is what ultimately leads to his defeat. He's so hellbent on revenge and destruction, even to his own demise, and that's just so poetic. Speaking of poetic, the moment when Mothra sacrificed herself to save Ghidorah was just so peak. I criticise King of the Monsters for having Mothra sacrifice herself, but I think it works a lot better here because she and Ghidorah are both guardian monsters of Japan. They're both one and the same, and instead of giving Ghidorah a power-up, it's more like she combines with him to achieve their perfect form. You see, in this movie, Ghidorah doesn't actually have any wings until he combines with Mothra's life force, which is such a creative switch-up. And the way they executed it was amazing. Ghidorah's wings shoot out and he flies into the night sky glowing a blinding gold. The suit looks jaw-droppingly good, and it's just so majestic, especially for a character who's usually an utter douchebag. Even Godzilla is taken aback by this. Not a role reversal we usually see, but it's pulled off flawlessly. 5. King Kong vs Godzilla Final Round. You all knew this fight would make it here, it was inevitable. Just to be clear, as a Godzilla fan, I'm still salty about the second half of this fight. King Kong is basically useless against Godzilla throughout the entire fight until out of nowhere, he gets struck by lightning, obtaining electric powers that somehow give him the edge he needs to do in the King of the Monsters. It's such a cop-out, but if I'm being honest, it's a pretty fitting one. This whole movie is a parody of itself. The main plot literally involves a TV executive taking Kong from his home so he can battle Godzilla in Japan. Yoshiro Honda is fully aware of the ridiculous nature of putting two cool things together for the people's entertainment, hence the satirical and comedic nature of the film, and this fight. Hell, even the suits look ridiculous and goofy, but it all works to make this film a hilarious classic. It's a joy to watch because of how goofy it is, and that goes double for this fight. The real iconic moments of this battle are the ones that play off of the movie's goofiness. The main three examples I can think of are the giant swing, the two monsters tumbling down the mountain, and of course, who can forget King Kong gagging Goji with a tree. They're all memorable moments that fit with the tone of the film, making an entertainingly silly slapfest that even all these years later still manages to be boundlessly charming. 4. Godzilla Final Wars, Godzilla vs Monster X / Kaiser Ghidorah. There are some fights on this list that are primarily noteworthy for the messaging or themes contained within, the narrative significance or wider cultural and or community impact of the fight. Then there are some fights that are just fucking awesome, okay? This being one of them. The finale of Godzilla Final Wars is carried almost entirely through visual presentation, accompanied by a godlike score and some equally amazing Foley sound effects that really emphasise every crunch and punch this fight displays, furthering your immersion in the absolute insanity that is this fight scene. And I mean that in the best way possible. Right off the bat, Monster X is introduced through the coldest way imaginable, floating down from the sky in what has to be a reference to Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. Kudos to the suit designers for making making him exude this intimidating aura even before he actually does anything. There's just something about glowing red eyes on a destroyed city landscape that goes so hard. Yet despite all that, Godzilla remains unfazed and undeterred. There's really no end to this guy's will to destroy. It only gets better when we get to the action. In a similar vein to the samurai of old, we see the two monsters glaring at each other in the eye, before going for the kill, clashing swords, or I guess claws in this instance, to no effect. Both monsters are on equal standing, which is kind of terrifying when taking into account the sheer amount of opponents Godzilla has easily destroyed in this movie. Monster X ain't no jobber, that's for sure. The cinematography here is just flawless. The camera trucks behind both monsters, eventually cutting to a wide shot depicting the two kaiju at opposite ends of this decimated city landscape, with thunder raging on in the background. Textbook example of phenomenal build-up to an epic climactic final battle. Mind you, everything I've talked about is just the first 30 seconds of the fight. Thankfully, this trend of awesomeness continues throughout, even becoming a tag team match when Mothra and Gigan enter the mix. Did I mention that while all of this is going on, the humans are also throwing hands? They board the Zillion ship to take on X and his cronies. The choreography in the human scenes are just as good as the monster fights, and it's satisfying watching them beat the crap out of X, who's been an ass this entire movie. Even when he gets defeated, the fight isn't over. Monster X begins changing, and if you didn't see this coming, then this is a pretty huge holy shit moment. He transforms into King Ghidorah, a four-legged variant we haven't seen before, but it looks just as badass as his prior form. The CGI transformation is a little dated, but the suit more than makes up for it. The finale of Final Wars is non-stop action, which is exactly what you'd expect from this movie, yet even then exceeds those expectations. 3. Godzilla vs Kong, Godzilla and Kong vs Mechagodzilla. Godzilla vs Kong pretty much delivers on almost everything we as kaiju fans have been wanting to see from cinema's pair of iconic monsters for countless decades, and then some. Godzilla is a badass, Kong is a badass, the fight scenes are badass, and of course Godzilla actually wins this time around. The reason I add that "and then some" qualifier is because there's a lot this film delivers that we weren't expecting but were still successfully executed, becoming major contributors as to why this movie rocks. The biggest of these being Mechagodzilla. We always talk about the many iterations Godzilla and Kong have had over the years, but let's not forget Mechagodzilla has undergone many changes too. First, he was an evil robot being controlled by aliens, then a morally grey robot piloted by humans, then a hero robot piloted by humans, and now an evil robot with the consciousness of Ghidorah. It's a long but genuinely intriguing tale that results in one of the coolest final showdowns in the entire franchise. Mechagodzilla is an absolute menace at first, effortlessly bullying Godzilla and even beating him in a beam clash for the first time in the character's history. It's going to take more than one monster to bring him down. When Kong enters the ring, the hype only increases. I just adore the part where they both grab Mechagodzilla's arms, crashing him head first into a building. Like, keep in mind, the two of them were beefing only moments ago, but there's like an unspoken mutual acknowledgement that Mechagodzilla is the bigger threat here, and it's just so fun to watch. My absolute favourite part of the scene happens after Mechagodzilla is defeated. Godzilla glares at Kong, not attacking him immediately, but cautiously waiting in anticipation. Kong recognises what he wants, dropping the axe accordingly, quite literally burying the hatchet between them. Finally, their beef is squashed. These two monsters who have been on opposing sides for decades are now enemies no longer. Until Godzilla jumps Kong in the next film, I guess, but still, it's a fantastic ending nonetheless. If even the monsters can stop fighting, perhaps the fandom can too. No? Am I being too optimistic? Probably so. But moving on. 2. Destroy all monsters, everyone versus Ghidorah. If you're a Godzilla fan watching this, which is probably the case, I mean, God knows how you got this far if you ain't, you knew this was going to be on the top 10 before I even got to the first ranking. Destroy all monsters is a pretty mid movie. Take it or leave it, this film certainly isn't amongst the best. This fight scene, however, total opposite. It's the only reason to watch this film in the first place. Why? Well, for starters, everyone is here. This movie is the culmination of all of Toho's monsters throughout the Showa era thrown into one movie. Destroy All Monsters was Infinity War decades before that movie came out. All the Toho kaiju come together for the common goal of, you guessed it, beating Ghidorah to a bloody pulp. Quite literally, as we see Godzilla stomping on Ghidorah's head with a bunch of blood spewing out. And man, is the whole fight just brutal for Ghidorah. I almost feel bad for him. Almost. Every monster gets a turn here, whether it's Gorosaurus dropkicking him, Kumonga and Mothra silking him, Manila strangling him with his trademark atomic donut of death. I mean, Ghidorah just gets absolutely bullied here. But I'm not gonna lie, it's satisfying as hell to watch. This guy's been a consistent threat to Earth for multiple films now. Of course he doesn't take the hint, but Godzilla will always be there to remind him regardless. In conclusion, it's just a perfect fight in every way. No interruptions, the perfect balance between violence and goofiness, great score, phenomenal cinematography, and of course, seeing almost every Toho monster on screen, especially back in the day, is hype beyond belief. Finally, Number 1, I'm sure you all saw this coming, Godzilla vs Destroyah, final round. It's going to be a Herculean task for any future filmmakers attempting to top this bout. The final fight of Godzilla vs Destroyah is easily the greatest bout in Godzilla history, primarily because it's the culmination of 6 movies worth of build-up, characterization and plot. 7 if you count the original 1954 film, as we see the return of Emiko Yamane alongside the Oxygen Destroyer playing a huge role in the creation of Destroyah, a kaiju birthed from a weapon of mass destruction, a weapon that was supposed to have died with Serizawa when he sacrificed his own life to destroy Godzilla. Destroyah is the literal embodiment of Serizawa's worst fears. Destroyah's primary motivation is to cause as much havoc and pain as possible, which we see multiple times throughout this fight. Like at the start when he interrupts a touching reunion between Godzilla and his son by attacking Junior unprovoked like he did last time, though this time around eventually killing him in the process. Or how about one part during the fight where he drags Godzilla across the floor, seemingly laughing the whole time. It's rare we see such a genuinely sadistic kaiju, and it just furthers the idea that Destroyah is the deadliest, most terrifying enemy Godzilla has ever had to face. Not only does he look menacing and metal as fuck, but remember, he is a product of the Oxygen Destroyer, the only thing that has canonically killed Godzilla. How fitting that Serizawa's worst fears about the Oxygen Destroyer made manifest are defeated by the very thing he tried to kill all those years ago. That, my friends, is poetry in film form. This whole fight is oozing with an overbearing amount of stress and tension. Not because Destroyah is a major threat to Godzilla and everyone else in Japan, although that is a big contributor, it's the fact that this whole time Godzilla is a ticking time bomb. Goji is undergoing a nuclear meltdown of sorts, with the movie consistently making it a point to remind you that his temperature is rising non-stop. They constantly cut back to this during the fight, making the audience lean forwards at the edge of their seat. Even if Godzilla wins, what's going to happen to him and the rest of Japan? Remember when I said this fight works because it's the culmination of multiple movies worth of plots? Well, that comes into play regarding the characters. Miki Saigusa is amongst the people still in the city while the fight is still going on. She's a character we've come to care for, and her dynamic with Godzilla and how the kaiju has shaped her life is a journey we have seen almost every chapter of. The reason Godzilla Junior's death is so tragic is because we have seen this character grow in 2 prior movies. A different type of Godzilla who has actually grown up around humans, breaking the trend of being a kaiju born of rage. These are characters we the audience want the absolute best for, so the stakes here are at an all-time high in this fight. The cherry on top of this confrontation is the ending. After Godzilla deals the killing blow to Destroyah, the humans start blasting him with Sub-Zero missiles, causing him to melt instead of exploding. This is the death of Godzilla, a tragic monster created by a weapon only knowing rage, yet despite all that learnt a new way of living through his son, saving him in the end as a final act of love. Not gonna lie, I actually teared up during this scene. The incredibly moving score definitely wasn't helping things. A lot of people have a hard time taking this genre seriously, and to a certain degree I can understand that, when all you see is men in suits flailing at each other, which is the preconception most have about the genre before actually taking a chance and watching it. But if one were to give it a chance, they could potentially experience a rollercoaster of satisfying emotions that perfectly encapsulate what cinema is all about. This ending is a beautiful send-off for this iconic character. It feels like I've barely scratched the surface on this fight. I could go all day. The lighting is great. The cinematography in some parts is bloody amazing. The score for the whole fight is breathtaking, as pretentious as that sounds. The climax of Godzilla vs Destroyah is near perfect, not surprising in the slightest that it made number 1 on this list. And with that, I've officially ranked every fight in all of the Godzilla films. Holy mother of moly. That was a long one. I did not expect this video to go on for this long, but I just had so much to say I couldn't help it. Going through every fight reminded me why I love this character and this franchise in the first place. And hopefully you guys feel the same. It's a simple premise, but to have this much variety and creativity sprout from it is a testament to the quality of these films. If you made it this far, then genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. But yeah, that's every Godzilla fight ranked. Like if you liked, dislike if you disliked, subscribe for more quality content, and I'll see you guys next time.
Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried.